So let us introduce our latest project.
It's a 1971 Chevrolet Caprice that we've christened as Fat Stack.
So if you want to see what 850 horsepower, trick suspension, and mile deep paint looks like on one of these, you might want to stick around. We've all heard that old saying, sometimes things have to get worse before they can get better. And that's the situation that we're in. Now we're going to disconnect a few things here under the hood, and then go up with the car and disconnect a few more. What we're going to do is separate the body from the chassis, leaving the engine on the frame. We could go up, take starter loose from the bottom. I like big bodies, and I cannot lie. You know, they should make a song about that. She's a beaut. Number 2. Well, the way that we're separating our body and chassis, we're going to have to remove the front and rear bumper. The reason for that is they more or less hook over it. Trying to separate it without them off, well, you're going to bend something up, and we definitely don't want to damage that grille. Alrighty, the bumper's loose. We've made some pretty good progress. We've got the transmission disconnected with the linkage and the speedo cable. We also got the emergency brake cable disconnected. What we need to do now is unhook the fuel tank lines and zip out the body bolts. If everything goes on without a hitch, we'll be ready to pull off that body. Removing body bolts may sound like a simple task, but sometimes it can be quite complicated. Now you can use an impact or a standard ratchet, but I'm going to give you a little tip. If you put the impact on there and they come right out, well, keep going. If you start hammering on that thing, hold off a second. Grab yourself just a regular old ratchet, put it on there, and keep constant pressure on it as you're cranking that thing out. The reason for that is inside of the body, there's a captured nut. And whenever you use an impact and it's hammering on it, well, you can break that thing loose, and to get it apart, you're going to have to cut on the body or torch off this bolt. Oh, that's a good sign. Ooh-wee. That one don't like it.
When it comes to these big body vehicles, Tommy is definitely the subject matter expert. At this point, he's taken apart so many heavy Chevys, it's become second nature.
Success! It's one of them instances you start thinking the powers that be if that thing come out.
As you can see, there's clearly a method to the madness.
Only thing between there is air. Guess you could say right now, it's time for the work to begin.
You know, guys, when you're starting a new project, it's real easy to get caught up in the moment and just start ripping this stuff apart. I think we've all been there. Get tools, trim pieces, hardware, body panels all strewn about like a tornado just ripped through your shop. In all reality, though, this truly is the time to slow down and take care of the parts and pieces that you're pulling off.
Come on, baby.
And I'm not just talking about the traditional tag and bag that'll keep everything organized and save you a significant headache down the road. You also need to consider that replacing broken or missing parts lost during disassembly can hurt both your sanity and your wallet. For example, the taillight housing on our 71 Caprice. This particular setup has a somewhat sturdy, hardened plastic shell, as opposed to its later model counterparts such as a 75 or 76 that were constructed from a flimsier fiberglass material. Although one is technically stronger and more durable, the approach is still the same. You never want to risk any unnecessary damage to your restoration components during disassembly because, as you guys know, this stuff is becoming harder and harder to come by.
The subject of working with glass normally scares people. It's easy to say that the main concern is breaking what you're trying to remove. Sacrificing your glass normally isn't the goal. But if you slow down, pay attention, it's really not that intimidating and it's pretty basic. With our big body, we need to remove ours for a couple of reasons. One is it leaks around the seal and we're planning to replace that vinyl top. To get this glass out, it's similar to some other GM models. We've got some trim around the perimeter and some wipers that need to go before all that fun can happen.
Removing these old wipers can be a little bit tricky. GM had a few different designs, so it's good to take a quick glance and it might save you a little bit of hassle. Oftentimes there's a small clip that needs to be unlatched. If you lift the arm off the window, this little tab can be slid out. Sometimes you may have to use a flat tip screwdriver or a pick to lift this tab up. Then with a little pressure from a pry tool on the end of the arm where it attaches to the pivot point, a little bit of wiggle action and it'll usually pop right off. And if possible, I like to use a plastic pry bar because it's a little more forgiving on chrome and painted surfaces.
Now it's time to work on the trim. With this setup, we've got a big wide piece here at the base of it for those hidden wipers, and it's held in place with a couple of screws. For any of you guys who've worked on a setup like this, you know that there's one of them that always seems to just give you a fit. If you have one of these, take a hammer and hit the handle of your screwdriver. This does a couple of things. One, it sets the tip of the screwdriver in the head of the screw. Also, it shocks the threads, which in turn helps to loosen things up.
Next up for removal is our top and our side windshield trim. And these are held in place with a little clip that have to be pried up with a specialty tool. What you want to do is slide the hook end up underneath the trim on top of the glass. Use the hook to find the clip, and once it's set, rotate your wrist to pry the clip off the trim to free it up. A little wiggling and pulling and the piece should pop off. Now you just gotta do that with the rest of the clips on the trim piece. Once it's all out of the way, time to tackle the glass itself.
There's several ways to go about this, and there's several different tools. And some of these are a bit more forgiving than others. To choose the correct one for your application, well, you need to know a main factor, and that is what's holding it in place. Is it the old school soft butyl, or does it have the tougher urethane? Another thing that you need to consider, are you trying to save that piece that you're removing? If not, you can flog it just about as hard as you want to. But if you are trying to save it, well, I'm going to recommend to you not to use anything air operated, because this thing can get pretty aggressive. With our old Chevy, it's got that old soft stuff, so it shouldn't be a big deal to get that thing out. What we're going to do to get this task done is use some windshield cutout wire, what some people refer to as piano wire, and kind of push it up under the edge of the glass and then saw it out old school wise, kind of like them two-man saws. Now, it isn't really required to be a two-man operation, but doing it this way lets each person pay attention to each side you're cutting. Joel's gonna pull that through there, and then I'm gonna hand him a bolt. I'm gonna use a bolt on my side, and we'll actually wrap this around there, and then we can pull it back and forth. I wouldn't recommend just taking this wire and wrap it around your fingers, because when you go to pulling on this, you're probably gonna cut yourself. For our side, I can choke it down this way, and you wanna pull it in the direction whichever way we're cutting. I'm gonna try to lay it around this glass corner. All right, pull it to you. We'll just go a little saw, a little saw. All right, let me come back. It makes some cool noises, don't it?
There it is.
Well, we need to get a stand to sit that dude on. Well, we've had a pretty good day, and old fat stack is spread out all across the floor.
You know, it's kind of funny, with this car put together, it was already taking up quite a bit of space, and now that it's disassembled, we're taking up the whole shop.
Now, fat stack, we've got some big plans for it. It's gonna get big power and make a huge statement, but that's all to come. Man, I'm whooped for the day.
Yeah, you're not a spring chicken anymore.
That's not very nice. Now we're going to be using some late model power to achieve our goals, and to say an LS swap is a popular subject, well, that goes without saying.
And as cool and iconic as this SBC may be, we've got something better planned for old Fat Stack. The cure for low horsepower is pure forced induction. We wanted our old big body to scream the tires right off the rear axle. And this Supercharged LS is going to do just that. Not only is this beautiful piece of automotive artwork generating an exorbitant amount of pulse-pounding ponies, that bronze powder-coated finish guarantees a complete package of performance and good looks. And of course, with great power comes the need for great stability. Our buddies Pat and Frankie of Engine Power birthed this motorized masterpiece from a bare block, dropped in an internally balanced crank with gun-drilled mains, hydraulic roller camshaft, and forged alloy pistons. Then topped it off with a Gen 5 Whipple supercharger, billet throttle body, Holley Terminator X engine management system, and a Center Shaft Series accessory drive kit. And let's not forget those killer custom machined valve covers. The proof is in the pudding, so we had to see the numbers. A rap sheet of 840 horses and 760 foot-pounds of torque opens that possibility for a few participation awards from those boys in blue. But we still got quite a bit of work to do before we're ready to set that crown jewel on top of our chassis. Now, to kind of keep that out of harm's way, we're going to go ahead and use this Pierre replica long block that we found at Summit Racing. And if you guys are doing multiple engine swaps at home, these things are pretty handy to have around. This particular set is from Hooker Blackheart, and it's designed to be used with the clamshell style mount. So if you've got a 73 through 76 GM big body, this is the setup you're going to need. But if you got a 71 or a 72 like old Fat Stack, well, you're going to want to go a different route. This setup uses the more common GM style mount with the two tabs that are 2 3/8 inches apart. It also gives you a couple inches of adjustment with a universal mounting plate that has extra bolt holes. We're looking to drop our new engine as close as possible to the original location of our small block. A common point of reference will be the center line of the crankshaft. Now, since we already separated the body from the chassis, pulling this old small block should relatively be a breeze. We brought in our buddy Mike, who's going to help us unzip a few bolts. What do you think, buddy? You ready to get started?
Let's do it.
All right. Come on, big guy.
Look what I found. You want a hand tight or a zippy tight?
Initially hand and then zip. Crank her out of here. Oh yeah.
She's heavy.
Easy. Got enough clearance?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's head back. With that old greasy small block out of the way, we're just about ready to set our mock-up motor in. But before we do that, I want to show you guys one more common reference point that's going to help get your new motor as close to factory original position as possible. The measurement you're going to want to make is from the front face of the bell housing to the rear tab on the engine mount. On our mock-up motor, it's about 14.5 inches. And our original setup measured in at about 14 3/8, which is pretty dang close. Now, if you got a larger spread between those two numbers, well, you might need to move your mounts forwards or backwards until you get a little more dialed into that factory number. But from where we're sitting, we're ready to drop this thing in. Mike!
You ready?
It's more awkward than heavy, like me. she's in. Many of us know that exhilarating feeling of dumping the clutch and keeping the pedal to the metal all the way down the block. Our buddies at American Powertrain heard our Big Bodies power plant was in need of some serious backup. They answered the call with a Tremec Magnum T56 6-speed. And to help ease installation, they also provided us with a Pro Fit kit that comes complete with bell housing, Hydromax hydraulic clutch system, flywheel and clutch plate assembly, as well as everything for the shifter linkage.
Team lift. Nice and easy.
Got one in.
Bolts are a little long. I think that just about does it.
Cool.
Sometimes when mounting your transmission, it requires some customizing or modifying to your crossmember. That's because more often than not, these aftermarket or late model units are significantly longer than what the car came with from the factory. Now, to install our crossmember isn't going to be all that big of a deal at all. With our new transmission being a little bigger, we had to move our old crossmember back just a bit. Luckily, this modification only required drilling a couple of holes. We lucked out with this big body Caprice because of this open C channel in the frame. This much room, shoot, we could just about put a transfer case under here. From the factory, our old Caprice had these little rubber pads that were mounted on the top and bottom of the crossmember. Now, we're not going to use them, but they were designed to dampen the vibrations coming from the engine and transmission. And I'm pretty sure that these things, well, they're not going to stand up to the capabilities of the power that thing's going to put out. So these are just going to hit the trash heap. I did have to take these little plates, cut the little thumps off of it, if you will. Now we'll just slap them in, throw in some bolts, we're ready to go. Sweet as pie. If you're looking to make one of these fancy upgrades like this 6-speed that we got from American Powertrain, there's one modification that's almost guaranteed that's going to happen, and that would be modifying or altering your transmission hump or tunnel. That's because this unit is a completely different size and shape. Also, the shifter housing sets up rather tall. When you put them side by side, it's plain as day. The new setup is longer and taller, but that's what it takes to get a few more of those gears in there and have the strength to handle all that power.
Another hurdle you guys may run into when doing this style of conversion is going to be your header selection. Now, we were kind of searching around the internet and couldn't really find a direct application for a 71 to 76 GM B-body LS swap. But what we did find is a couple of different styles. One is for a Chevrolet C10 pickup, and the other is for a GM A-body, kind of similar to a Chevelle. And a lot of times with this stuff, it's best to just do a little bit of trial and error, so we're going to bolt on both set of headers and see which one's going to work best for our application. Is it hitting over there?
We are just touching.
I'm kind of touching on my side as well. But I got plenty of clearance on the starter, but we can modify this if we have to, so. Cool, let's try that other set.
All right.
How's it look on your side?
It does have ample amounts of space between the crossmember and the steering shaft.
Yeah, the way it hugs the block can be a good thing and a bad thing, because on this side it's going to be right up against that starter, and just the way it kind of runs uphill, I think I know which direction we're going to have to go.
I think so too.
Well guys, the jury has reached its verdict. This set of Hedman Hustler headers that we found at Summer Racing is probably going to be our best bet for this application, and for a number of reasons. For one, this setup is going to give us adequate spacing between the header, both sides of the bell housing, and as well as the starter. And because of the way these are angled downhill, we don't have to modify that rear crossmember.
Hey guys, we're calculating our incision point that we're going to be making on fat stack in efforts to install that 6-speed. Now you could do this a couple of ways. One, cut a giant hole or basically remove all the tunnel and then slide your chassis in there and fill in the void. But with our style, we want to be quite a bit more accurate than that. So to do this, you need a couple of common points that's on the body and the chassis to measure from. We're going to start off using a straight edge and lay it across the 2 center body mounts. Center it up in the hole, and then we can take our measurement. From the forward side of our ruler to the back of the transmission is about 10.5. So we want a little bit of clearance, so we'll just make an incision at 9.5. You calibrated your eyeball lately?
It's been a minute. You on the front edge there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I know we just got to be close, so that applies to floor pans, hand grenades, and horseshoes.
Now when it comes to cutting out this transmission tunnel, we're going to try the least invasive technique that's possible, meaning not cutting out more than we technically have to. Basically, we'll use our drilled hole as a center point of our outline, and the cut will run just on the inside edge of the hump towards the firewall. From there, we'll have a few spot welds to drill out. Going this route has several advantages. For one, it significantly cuts down the amount of fabrication time and doesn't require a brake or feed roller to build your panels. Secondly, it gives us a better chance of being able to use a stock replacement carpet when we go to put the interior back in. I've seen guys get a little cut and fab happy on this conversion before, and they usually end up having to buy a custom tailor-made carpet, which we all know only adds more headache and leaves less change in your pocket. But we'll want to keep a couple of those spot welds intact, that way it kind of folds up on itself as the transmission passes through it. And from there, we just got to build a couple smaller panels on that bottom edge, which is a lot easier than having to build a whole new trans tunnel.
Now, one thing you want to consider when doing this kind of swap is where the shifter is going to be in correlation to the seat. Now, with our 6-speed, we do have options, and we can move it forward if we have to. You may not run into any problems if you're a taller guy, but for those shorter fellas, they might have to adjust the seat. So it is possible you may have to notch it. But we'll find out when it all goes together.
One of the first obstacles you have to overcome when drilling out these old spot welds is simply locating them. I like to use an angle grinder with a 36 grit roll-lock disc to chew away that 50-year-old undercoating. If you keep the disc flat while grinding, those spot welds should reveal themselves as little dark circles. Then I'll mark them with a center punch to guide my spot weld cutter. You can use a drill bit here, but just make sure you don't cut through both layers of sheet metal. Then just give it a few whacks with a hammer and a chisel to pry it apart. You don't want to swing for the fences here because you want to preserve as much of the original sheet metal as possible. Having a set of dolly skates makes realigning the body to the chassis a whole lot easier. But if you only have a couple of floor jacks, that can also get the job done.
Got to go forward about a foot. Yep, that's probably pretty close.
Yeah, it's right on top of it.
Whew, kind of tall on the inside.
Kind of like a little mailbox sticking up there. Cal induction floor. Hey guys, while you were gone, we went ahead and reinstalled our front seat just to kind of check the final position of our shifter. Luckily, we're not even gonna have to notch it. Our next step is to go ahead and start building some filler panels for our trans tunnel. Perfect. Now, one of the first obstacles you're gonna run into when building this panel is determining where to cut the hole for your shifter mount. Now, the way I do it requires a little trick of the trade. Simply cut the head off a bolt with threading that's similar to your shifter mount. Then grind the tip to a point and thread it into your linkage and set your panel back on top of that point. From there, you can take a little ball peen hammer, give it a quick smack, and that little sharpened bolt will work as a center punch, giving you the exact location of where you need to drill your pilot hole. But another thing you need to consider is the spacing between your panel and your transmission. The general rule of thumb is roughly 3/4 of an inch. So what you can do is take 4 or 5 of these paint sticks, wrap them together, and that'll get you pretty close. And just use that as a spacer between your panel and your transmission. You'll be good to go. But for right now, everything's looking pretty good, so I'm gonna get to work making some templates and bending some metal. There are several reasons why it's a good idea to make templates when you're fabricating. In this particular case, a template allows you to build an outline of the trans tunnel that you can use as a guide when you're cutting and shaping the metal. This can be especially helpful if you're not an experienced fabricator or if you're working with an odd-shaped transmission tunnel. And if you need to create multiple pieces, a template allows you to replicate the process exactly each time. It can also help you avoid making unnecessary cuts or adjustments, saving you some time and material. Overall, making templates is a crucial step in the fabrication process that can really help ensure that your work is more accurate and precise. Now technically, when you get to this point, you could drill a bunch of holes and plug weld it all the way across. Problem with that is it doesn't look very good, and anywhere where that metal is overlapping is going to be prone to corrosion. But we want this thing to last a long time and look good doing it, so butt welds and metal finishing it is. Now basically what I've done here is laid my piece over the top of the hole and then zipped in a few spot welds. And what that does is it helps kind of match the shape of the trans tunnel. And once I've got my shape kind of dialed in, I can make some cuts on the top and bottom part of these seams, and that'll shift it from a lap to a butt, and then we can do our final welding from there. Now this is one of those times where you really want to pay attention to the direction your sparks are flying. I've wrapped both the dash and the transmission in some deflection paper to avoid critically damaging the housing underneath. Keeping an air blower close by can help control the heat while you're welding so you don't warp the panel or catch the undercoating on fire. Once you've got everything all welded up, it's time to polish off all the ugly to give our trans tunnel a nice, clean look. Well, I don't know about you, but I'd say that trans tunnel looks pretty darn good.
Well, you know, there's always room for improvement, but that'll get the job done.
No, you ought to be careful what you say about me. Everything I do is a reflection of you. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm gonna call this transmission accomplished.
You mounted a horn in the trans tunnel?
After separating the top half from the bottom half of our bow tie, we got busy taking it all apart. Luckily, there weren't too many surprises. Woo! Well, for some of us at least. It didn't take very long, but that's kind of how it goes. You ever notice how it only takes minutes to get something apart? There it is. But hours and days to go the opposite direction.
With what we have up our sleeve for fat stack, well, this rusty and crusty thing isn't gonna cut it. Our big body's getting candy paint, trick interior, and that supercharged LS. This thing obviously needs some attention. We're going to be addressing the appearance and components of our chassis. Now, before you get too carried away rubbing on all that pretty stuff, you know it's always a good idea to make sure you're working with something sound. Now, with a frame and this car being so old, you never know, it could have been involved in an accident and you could have a couple of bends in it. The front and rear rails are where you will normally find the damage. If you see any odd kinks or bumps, that's usually a dead giveaway of an accident, especially if the spot in question is only on one side. Here in the middle, you will also find spots where people use a jack to lift the car. If this bottom edge is all bent up, well, you should repair it. This center section really isn't all that difficult. All you really need is a big hammer or even an adjustable wrench to massage that edge back flat. But if you're needing to repair the rails, it usually requires the help of some professional assistance.
And another thing you're going to want to do is make sure that your frame is square. And in order to do that, you just got to measure from a few common points of reference. If your cross measurements between the suspension holes or body mount locations are exactly the same or relatively close, you're probably in good shape. Usually, there should be no more than 3/16 of an inch of difference at the absolute max. Another thing you're going to want to look out for is rust. Now, a fat stack does come from the great state of Tennessee where there's not a whole lot of salt or snow on the roads, so that means that the surface corrosion is minimal. Dirt and debris can build up in the lower parts of a vehicle and cause some serious problems. Sometimes the frame may not necessarily have a hole in it, but that doesn't mean it isn't rusted thin. A quick glance on the inside of the frame can help tell the story.
Something else that's a good idea to do is to check your body mounting location holes. This can be a difficult task if you're looking at a chassis that has a body sitting on it. What happens is this opening rusts out, and now these front here on the passenger side are the common two to look at because of the air conditioning evaporator or the heater core. What you have is an upper and lower rubber mount that sandwiches the frame, and moisture gets trapped into here and that causes corrosion. And over the period of time, well, that hole rusts through. Now, I've seen these holes rust so bad that the mount would basically fall right into the frame. You can fix this though. I've used a washer in the past. It takes some cutting and grinding to make everything work, so just be prepared to spend some time if you have that problem.
Now, the overall condition of our frame is in pretty good shape, other than some surface rust and a little bit of grease. And if you guys are doing this project at home, you can save yourselves a few bucks by using some scrapers or even some wire brushes. And after a little bit of cleanup, you could just go ahead and paint it or apply some chassis hardener. Now, what we plan on doing is actually sandblasting the entire thing and then doing some powder coating. But either method you decide to go with, just gonna need to do a little bit of prep work.
Oftentimes with the frame, it looks like the trigger man running the welder wasn't too worried about welding boogers, so we're gonna clean it up. I like to use a blending disc instead of a grinding rock. A rock is really too aggressive, and oftentimes what ends up happening is all your marks that you make on your frame, well, they show through your top coat.
And all we're trying to do here is just kind of smooth everything out and knock down the high spots. And obviously, the more time spent, better the end result. A blending disc is more forgiving, but it still generates a lot of heat. So you're going to want to bounce around to prevent possibly damaging the frame's structural integrity.
Like I mentioned to you guys earlier about this grinding rock being too aggressive, I'm going to put my John Hancock here on the side of the frame rail. Now, you don't have to be worried about it too much because where this black spot is, well, that's where the bumper bracket goes. And we'll see once this thing's powder coated if you'll be able to see my name.
Well, that should just about do it. We're going to get this thing loaded up on a trailer and go visit our buddies at the powder coater. Today is a big milestone for Fat Stack. We're headed to Blast from the Past to get our frame sandblasted and powder coated. Vance and his crew have years of experience cleaning any and everything that has four wheels or even four legs.
You know, I think today's gonna be a pretty light day for us.
Forklift is already doing most of the work. Our old chassis has over 50 years under its belt and is well past its midlife crisis. So now, it's time for an upgrade. And sometimes, that calls for carving it to the bone and starting fresh. Know that old saying where you can either have something done fast or good? Well, one reason why we go to see these guys is they figured out how to do both. When it comes to sandblasting, there are many different types of media that you can use. And it all depends on your application. The guys at Blast from the Past prefer to use crushed glass because they feel it gives them the capability to tackle jobs with surgical precision or open the floodgates to remove industrial-grade grime. With our chassis being heavy-duty steel, they didn't need to worry about any warpage or blowing holes in the frame. They went full scorched earth, and within a few hours, Fat Stack's skeleton was back down to bare bones. So why don't we just call it a day and paint the chassis ourselves? Well, because arguably, powder coating is the best method to prevent corrosion and add durability to the finish. Powder coating uses a process known as electrostatic spray deposition. The ions in the powder are charged and they become attracted to the grounded metal of the frame. Similar to how a magnet sticks to your fridge. You can also pick from a variety of colors and finishes. We went with a semi-gloss black for a slick, classic look. The frame is then moved into a curing oven and left to bake at around 400 degrees Fahrenheit. There, the powder melts to form a continuous film across the surface of the chassis, and once cooled, will form a finish that is stronger and more durable than paint. And so here it is, a complete transformation from dirty and crusty to fresh and classy. The semi-gloss chassis black was a safe choice. And yeah, we could have went with something a bit more exotic. But trust me, when we're all said and done, it's gonna be real nice.
For sure. And with this step taken care of, we can finally install all of our new fancy suspension. And I tell you, I'm getting pretty excited to see this thing finished and all dolled up. Oh, and don't forget our little science experiment. Powder coating is usually kind of thick, but not enough to hide those grinding marks from the rock. But up here where we use that blending disc, it's nice and smooth.
So if you're looking to add some glamour to your undercarriage, powder coating should be an option.
From day one, whenever we kicked off Project Fat Stack, we knew we were going to have to address the suspension. So now the time is upon us. Our frame is all prettified up and we got a bunch of parts sitting over there in the floor. And I ain't gonna lie, I'm feeling a little giddy.
From the factory, that hefty Chevy had excessive amounts of body roll and kind of handled like an old steamboat. However, this lineup of goodies is gonna be the solution that's gonna give us a tailored ride height improved stability, and one heck of an attitude adjustment. To have our big body sitting right, we went to Summit Racing and snagged us a kit from QA1. This setup allows you to lower or raise the ride height on a big body. Our goal is to have Fat Stack sitting just a bit lower on the backside, and this will give us more than enough adjustment. To help out in the handling department, we have coilovers on all 4 corners, along with tubular upper and lower control arms and upgraded sway bars.
Now out back, a rear sway bar on the 2nd gen Caprices was an option from the factory. Just adding one would help reduce body roll, but this one is way better than OG. Also, the rear links are pretty trick. They're adjustable on the uppers and lowers. This helps to set the pinion angle and also allows you to center the rear axle in the opening at your desired ride height. For the rear end, upgrading was a must. This Mosier M9 we found at Summit Racing will handle all the abuse that we're going to throw at it with that 800 horsepower LS. We checked off all the boxes with a true track, deeper gears, 31 spline axles, disc brakes, a back brace, and powder coated shiny black. It's strong and a looker.
And the first piece of the puzzle is going to be our Street Series lower tubular control arms. And man, these things got a boatload of benefits. For one, they're lighter and stronger than the factory originals. They also have serviceable ball joints and polyurethane bushings that decrease drag for a nice smooth ride. Not to mention this slick powder coat finish makes for a nice clean undercarriage.
What'd you do with your hammer?
I'll tell you one thing.
Thank you.
One of the big advantages of having this chassis separated from the body is that it makes installation of these suspension components a whole lot easier.
One of the most crucial components to this suspension upgrade would have to be the coilovers. Now the ones we chose to go with are dual adjustable, meaning with the twist of these 2 knobs, you can change the rate of compression and rebound. Now as far as installation goes, you just pretty much slap the coil spring here through it, kind of like this, and then mount this coilover as if it was a shock.
Now don't forget to spread a little anti-seize on the threads of your coilover shocks. This will make it much easier to spin your adjustment collar even after you're finished with final assembly.
The next trick piece that we're going to be installing are the QA1 upper control arms of the Pro Touring Series. What's great about these is it's going to increase the camber and caster gains over top of our factory units. Now that alone will help make the car handle daylight and dark difference from that stock setup.
Now, our kit didn't come with new spindles, but we were able to refurbish the old ones with some sandblasting and a fresh coat of paint. Now, a little tip for you guys is if you wait to bolt on your dust cover, it'll make seating the spindle on the ball joint a little bit easier. Also, if you take an O-ring pick and stick it into your cotter bin hole and just kind of clock it parallel with the frame, that'll make sliding that pin in a total breeze. Just some forward thinking, that'll save you a little bit of headache. With Fat Stack pushing some serious horsepower as well as weighing in at almost 4,000 pounds, we needed a serious set of brakes to hold up to the abuse. Our friends at EBC Brakes sent us this drilled and slotted hub assembly that performs just as good as it looks. And to complete the ensemble, we opted for the EBC Red Stuff ceramic brake pads. What's unique about these is that they produce 50% less brake dust than an OEM pad, and we won't have to worry about any kind of thermal cracking thanks to its air-cooled configuration. And since these are designed to be a replacement and improvement off the factory originals, installation is a total breeze to where you won't even break a sweat. Most aftermarket brake companies require you to use their internal components in their hub assembly. However, with this EBC setup, we were able to use OE style wheel bearings, seals, and hub covers. So, if you're looking to step up the stopping power of your hot rod, or just put some whoa in your go, this setup from EBC Brakes won't steer you wrong.
Well, we're getting dangerously close to finishing the front suspension on our big body. One of the last things that we need to take care of is the steering components, like these tie rods and idler arm that we got from Rock Auto. Now, as far as our gearbox goes, we needed to do something with it. It's all rusty and crusty, and it's leaking out of the pitman shaft. Now, you can buy a seal kit that will repair this issue, but you know, we're throwing quite a bit of performance at this big body. So what we're going to do is install all our steering components, including this old box, kind of as a mock-up to show you guys the difference between a slow box versus that upgraded fast ratio. Now guys, please don't judge me from this complex apparatus that I've engineered to hold a steering column to basically simulate what it would look like in the car. Now what we're going to do is show you guys the ratio from the input that you apply to the steering wheel, meaning the rotation, to the amount of degrees that the wheel turns left or right. So let's see what we've got on this thing. Alrighty, that's all the way to the left side lock. Then I'm going to use this piece of tape, mark it on the center on the top side to kind of use as a visual aid. Now let's see how many we got. 1, 2, about 2 3/4. So what that tells us is our box isn't a really drastically slow one, but it's really not a fast one either. So the next thing we want to show you is we're going to take the steering wheel and have the rotors where they're running parallel with the frame rail, and then turn the steering wheel a half of a revolution. And then we want to measure that to see how far they turn in that direction. We already know this is the slower box of the two. So after a half turn, the straight edge will show us our baseline to compare from. All right, now let's swap out to that new gearbox and see what it gets us. We got that new box in place. We're going to recenter the front end and then do our half a revolution to see what it got us. When you put them side by side, you can see the half turn we did on our new setup is wider, and that's going to equal more responsive steering. We all think of Rock Auto when it comes to replacement parts, but if you're looking for performance pieces, you may want to check them out as well.
A big body delivering big power undoubtedly deserves big wheels. Now, to some of you old school hot roddy guys, I know that anything larger than 15 inches on a 5-spoke wheel is straight up cringy. However, if you take a step back and consider the sheer physical size of that car, a larger diameter rim like these Desperados we got from US Mags is not only going to complement the grace, elegance, and style that these cars were known for in their heyday, it's going to give them one heck of a facelift. We'll also be wrapping them in these Continental Extreme Contact DWS 06 Plus tires. These are ultra high performance and specifically designed for sport coupes and sedans, just like old Fat Stack. They're also built to deliver skillful handling at high speeds, which, with 840 horses under the hood and 3 pedals to play with, will need all the traction we can get.
With all the pieces in place, Fat Stack is looking large and in charge. A Mosier M9 rear and QA1 suspension sitting on US Mag wheels, wrapped in Continental tires, sets the tone for the attitude we're going for. Combine that with an American powertrain 6-speed tied to 800 plus horses, that's what I call pure Detroit muscle. So if you've got a project that's in need of some massaging on the body, or you need to take care of some rust, we're going to show you a few tips and tricks how to take care of these tasks, all the while with simple processes.
Now, Now, it's no secret that rust in the rear quarter panel area is a common Achilles heel in these old vehicles. And if you've got a project at home that's roughly 25 years or older, chances are you're gonna run into this issue. And with old Fat Stack, we actually got pretty lucky. The fact that this is the only problem area on the entire car, well, it's truly a blessing. And a lot of that has to do with a big chrome trim piece that used to run along this bottom edge. What happens is eventually over time you get sand and water and dirt, all kinds of stuff trapped in between that panel and that trim piece, and eventually it rots through. Luckily, making this kind of repair isn't all that difficult or complicated, but can be a little intimidating to you guys that have never done it before. But if you've got some basic air tools like a wire wheel, grinding stone, and a cutoff wheel, well, you're already in good shape. And if you've got a small MIG welder like a 110 or a 140, that'll work just fine for this application. But first things first, we need to cut the rusty metal out of this car. And there is a way that I like to map it out so that I'm not trimming off more than I need to. Using a roll of masking tape, lay the top edge in the middle of the body panel line. I like to use a marker to trace the bottom edge of the tape just in case it doesn't hold when cutting. Cut all the way across the bottom of the tape, and then use a grinding stone to weaken the spot welds. You can also use a drill bit or even a spot weld cutter. Once you've given everything a good once over, you can yank the panel until it pops loose. You know, guys, sometimes in life things don't always turn out as you originally planned. As you can see, we've got some extra corrosion on these inner braces that we need to repair. Now, I've already took the liberty and built a couple of patch panels. We'll get all this nastiness cut out, weld these in, and then we can move on to the outer skin. Now, some of you may be wondering why I'm not running any solid beads. Well, if you don't spot weld, it can become harder to control the heat of the metal, possibly resulting in warpage. Keep in mind that grinding can create just as much heat as welding. So, as you're smoothing out your welds, be sure to skip around and not spend too much time in one area so that the heat can evenly disperse. Well, guys, we got our patch panels welded in. Still got a little bit of surface rust on this back part. I'm just gonna go ahead and rust treat that. Once that's secure, we'll spray in some black epoxy primer. We'll call this thing done. Epoxy primer is ideal for sealing out moisture. When it cures, it has a thick outer shell that is non-absorbent, unlike self-etching primer, which is porous. Now, you may be wondering why I've got an entire quarter panel skin sitting on the table when really all we need is this rear patch. Well, due to supply chain issues, we couldn't find the piece that we needed, but our buddies over at Rock Auto had this in stock and they sent it right over. This skin is constructed from high quality sheet metal and features the same dimensions as an original factory replacement. It even has the whole mount pre-cut for the side marker light. Its protective coating also prevents damage during shipping and future corrosion. And to some of you, it may seem like a waste that we're just cutting out a rear section and scrapping the rest. But this is one of those situations that I want you to consider that your time is your money, and the amount of hours spent building that panel is well worth the cost of a new skin. Now, if you want to TIG weld this piece, go right ahead. It's really all about personal preference and the tools you have at your disposal. However, using a MIG on these plug welds will give you a sturdier hold in the long run. Not to mention, make the process much more efficient. After your welds are in place, you need to evenly smooth out the surface. Just don't get too aggressive with your grinding because you can weaken the structure. I recommend a 36 grit roll lock because it gives the metal a gritty surface for the filler to latch onto, along with a nice, clean finish. Man, oh man, what a difference a few hours of work makes. And you know, doing patch panels can seem really tedious, but the more time you spend on your metal work, the less time you're gonna have to spend sanding on some filler.
Let's start off saying accidents happen, and usually what's left behind is a dent. Now sometimes they're significant, while others, they're barely noticeable at all. When you're looking to fix a dent, there's several ways you can go about it. One of the main factors is, can you get to the backside and push it out? If you can, that makes all the difference. You can use hammers, picks, or even wooden blocks to whip it back into shape. But if not, you're gonna have to go about things a little bit different. This is an old school dent removing tool, and how it works is you drill a hole here in the panel, screw this thing into it, slide the weight on the puller back and forth, and that will slowly start to pull that dent out. Then you will repeat this process by drilling multiple holes in there and continuing on till you get it to the desired shape. Problem with using this tool is it develops a whole nother set of problems. That would be, you've got a bunch of holes in your panel. So I'm gonna ask you to hold off on using this thing. A better way is to use what's referred to as a stud gun. Now these have been around for quite a while and they have multiple uses. To pull the dent, it has these small draw pins that you weld to the panel. Then, using their slide hammer that clamps to those pins, you actuate the weight on it to pull out the dent just like that old school tool, but without the holes. To get started, we've got to skin that back to bare steel. I'm using a 50 grit sanding disc to make light work of stripping down this heavy Chevy. With our tool plugged up, we're ready to drop in one of our pull pins and hit the trigger. This tool requires you to push the tip up against the body and to press it. This action completes the circuit for the welding process. That glowing tip you see before you is not a special effect. That metal is molten. Case is getting hot, boys. Now obviously, the more pins you put on, the more points you can pull from. And it may take you a round or two to get this thing dialed in. I'm using this to actually see how deep that dent is, but with our pins in place, we can start pulling. What we're trying to do is take this thing from concave and undo what happened. So you want to move things around slowly. You'll start to see the dent work itself outward as you start to move the metal. Also, you don't want to get too eager and pull it out too far, or else that will create a whole new problem. Let's check it, man, let's check it. Our panel's looking good. Now we just need to remove the pins. You just simply clip them off, grind off the excess. Using a standard set of side cutters, you want to try to trim as close to the tip as possible. Otherwise, you're going to be removing the rest with a grinder. Now I'm going to step it up to 36 grit with the air sander to make sure I get everything nice and smooth. Just don't overdo it and keep the grinder moving to keep the heat low. Hey guys, we're gonna have our noses to the grindstone today for sure, and we plan to use all the elbow grease that we saved up in preparation of applying some fancy shiny candy paint on Fat Stack.
That's right, and we did have a few bumps and bruises that we needed to address before we got it all sanded down to bare steel.
So our goal is to have candy green paint sprayed on this, it's setting back on the chassis, and possibly a new vinyl top installed. We've spent days repairing, block sanding, and priming to get our 71 Chevy Caprice ready for some show-stopping House of Color candy paint.
Now you're going to become intimately familiar with your sanding block to the point of probably even dreaming about it at night when your head hits the pillow. It's going to feel like Groundhog Day for a bit, but if you do everything the right way, it'll be like an early Christmas.
If you're looking for the perfect reflection on your ride, there's one thing that you're going to have to get up close and personal with, and that would be some sanding blocks. Because you can't paint a car straight, you have to sand it straight. So the first thing that I'm going to tell you that you need to do, and that is read your panel. Now our big body's got a couple of hard body lines here on the middle, then here in the broad side of it, it's got a convex shape, and then on the top side, well, it's concaved, and it runs the length of the quarter panel. Having an assortment of sanding blocks is going to make your life a whole lot easier. Now I've got a couple of long and short ones, very long ones, one that I like to call an idiot stick because it's pretty hard and flat, and you can't block a car flat with one of these. Well, you get the point. And then we've got this teardrop one. Now not all of these are created equal, and let me show you why. Some of these are rather flexible, and the other ones don't have any flex at all. Also, the shape of it. Now, depending on what you're trying to sand is going to dictate which one of these you need. For instance, oftentimes the longer the panel, well, the longer the sanding block you need. Now, first thing we're going to get started on is this piece right up here. Some tools fit better than others. Now, the problem that you can run in with some, though, is if they're flexible, they can leave an obscure shape to them. So on this one, what I would probably do is sand similar to this, turning the block up on its edge. One thing you have to be conscious of is you're only cutting on that small portion of the sanding block. So you could be cutting grooves into the panel depending on your pressure and the coarseness of your sanding paper. So if you decide to use this technique, get the panel about 80 to 90% there, and then come back with this one and blend everything in. That should leave that pretty darn nice. Now everyone wants that perfect reflection, and that can be kind of hard to achieve sometimes. But I like to tell everybody, if you've got a sanding block in your hand, you're basically shaping the side of the car. And that, well, if you have the right block, it can make that reflection get truer a lot faster and easier. For instance, if you think of this little short guy here, we're trying to sand this long quarter panel. This is kind of like a baby bulldozer. This thing's kind of short and wavy, well, it's going to follow that contour that's on there from this end to this end. However, if you use this big long mama jama, well, you're covering a whole lot larger surface. And whenever you go to sand that away, it's going to blend all of this in together a whole lot nicer. The first thing we need to do is hit the side with some guide coat to help identify any pinholes or surface imperfections. And don't be shy with it, lay it on thick and make sure to cover the entire area you're going to be working on. I'm going to start with my idiot stick and slap on some 220 grit sandpaper. You want to go in controlled motions here, following the lay of the panel. If you go against the grain, if you will, you can dig into the primer and create ripples in the surface. Now, I mentioned to you guys earlier that the edge of this thing would cut some grooves into the panel. After blowing it off, you can see each individual stroke where I started and stopped. That's what I was talking about. You'd have to come back and blend in. Well, I have this center section sanded a little better than halfway, and now I'm going to switch over to this much longer block. The reason I'm doing that is, one is, you know, you always want that body line to be nice and crisp. This thing will help to ensure that crispness is there. This panel's blocking out really nice, and I hope a few of these tips that I've given you will help you with your project. You know, it's funny with paint and body work. Good body work goes unnoticed. Bad body work is highly noticed. If you guys run off for a little bit, I'm gonna get after it.
Now, since Tommy's got dibs on the prep booth, I'm gonna go ahead and get some epoxy primer sprayed on the hood, fenders, and header panel of our Fat Stack project using the pop-up booth we got from the guys over at Mobile Environmental Solutions. This portable auto spray booth is rugged and versatile, giving you everything you need for a fully functional pop-up paint room. It only takes about 10 minutes to set up or tear down and runs off a couple 110-volt blowers. It's 100% vinyl, made in the USA, and checks off all the boxes for capture efficiency regulations, air compliance, and fabric flammability standards. For a fast, flexible, and reliable setup, our go-to is Mobile Environmental Solutions.
Well guys, after a few hundred hours of rubbing and massaging on Fat Stack, we finally have it in the booth, ready to start spraying on some of that candy color. Now the journey to get to this point has been rather a lengthy one.
Now we want old Fat Stack to look good backwards, forwards, inside and out. So that means taking a little bit of extra time to clean up, prep, and paint all these hard to reach spots, including right here at the firewall. The firewall isn't going to get the candy treatment, so we just sealed it off with a black epoxy primer and 3 coats of classic low gloss black. Once we put Fat Stack back together, that color will help pop out that bronze Supercharged LS when you take a peek under that hood.
Now we've been telling you guys that we're gonna be painting our old car, but you may be questioning things because we've got the outside taped up. But for a good reason. We're gonna be painting the door jambs first and separately, and it's all because of that cool trick color we're spraying.
Now when it comes to these complicated candies and pruls, you really want to pay attention to every brush of your paint gun. For example, if you wanted to paint your jams and the quarter panel at the same time, more than likely you're going to be spraying 3 coats this way and 3 coats this way, which is going to cause a 6-coat overlap right here in the middle, and that can be a problem. A consistent overlap pattern is crucial when you're spraying a translucent candy like we are. Once you start laying down color, the amount of layers can affect the shade. If you're not conscious of how you're spraying, you'll get visible dark spots in your paint job.
Now the first product that we're going to be applying is a coat of sealer. Now hopefully it lays down pretty slick, and all we have to do is 1 coat, but we may have to do 2, we'll just have to see. Using sealer is an important step to ensure a quality and long-lasting paint job. Sealer acts as an adhesion promoter to help bond the coating to the vehicle surface. It also helps to protect against solvent reactions and can increase the overall life of your finish. The roof and the jambs are the first parts we're going to hit. The roof is only going to get our black base coat and a couple of coats of clear, but the jambs will be first in line for that candy paint.
When it comes to custom automotive paint, there's one name that always seems to stand out amongst the rest, and that would be House of Color. Our buddy Reed came down to lend his expertise in applying some of their candy onto Fat Stack. Now we opted for what was the KBC09 Organic Green, and it's not exactly a candy, but it's a base coat candy. Kind of explain the difference between the two.
Right, so a standard candy generally would have a metallic base, something like this, and you would put a tinted candy over that, and that would be what a candy was. The problem with that is you have to be very skilled to get that base, that metallic, to lay out really good, and you have to be really skilled to make sure your overlap and pattern is right on a true candy. So to help eliminate that, John created what we know as a candy base coat. These actually came out in 1984, but we've just been perfecting them ever since.
So what's kind of like the time frame that you would have to establish from sealer to your last coat of clear to, give yourself a window and, can you walk away from it? Can you come back to it?
So for the original candies, you're kind of stuck in, once you start, you can't stop, because those are a polyurethane, which are activated. So once you step away from that and it activates, it hardens up, you have to resand that before you can continue. With these candy base coats or the base coat style candies, it's a lot more user-friendly. So you can generally go in, get your sealer on. That takes 15 to 30 minutes to flash off. Once that happens, you can go in with your base coat, and that's usually a 15-minute flash as well. Once you get your color that you want is achieved, again, 15 minutes to a half hour, you can walk in with your clear coat. So depending on how big the car is and if you're doing graphics or not, it can range from bare minimum, you're probably 3 to 4 hours. Top side, it can be weeks.
Looks like Tommy's getting ready to wheel out the masking station.
We got plenty to do. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right.
When it comes down to it, masking is truly an art form in itself. Taking your time to do it right helps ensure that you'll end up with a cleaner and more professional looking paint job. You want to be sure to apply tape around the edges of your paper, letting half of it stick out before you fit it to the car. After you lay it down, you'll still need to apply more tape in certain spots just to make sure everything you don't want painted gets covered. If you have a lot of difficult contours, you should probably use fine line tape first. But once you finish laying down all that paper, it's finally time to let that paint fly. So Reed, in all your years and experience, what are some of the most common myths and misconceptions about candy paint that you could clear up as an expert in your field?
It's not impossible to touch up. Everybody thinks it is. Everything is possible. It's just your skill level and the patience you put into it. Just practice, practice, practice. If your overlap is right and your distance is right and your speed is right, you can basically do anything.
Well, the moment is finally upon us. After almost 200 hours of block sanding, priming, and masking on Fat Stack, it's ready to get its candy green paint. We got our buddy Reed in there who's tacking off the car. Tommy's in the mixing room mixing up some sealer. And after that, he's gonna lay down a black base coat and then finally that green color. I tell you, it's been a long time coming.
We opted to go with a black base coat for a couple of reasons. One, if you're looking to try your hand at candy, spraying over a black base is far more forgiving. Second, what color you use as a base will determine the color that you end up with, kind of how light or how dark it is. And with us using this black, it gave us that perfect green that we had our eye on.
Now while Tommy's finishing up in the paint booth, I went ahead and applied the same masking technique that we used on the body to our front fenders and our header panel. Now a little trick for you guys is if you leave about 1/8 of an inch of overhang on your tape, that's going to leave a nice soft edge for your base coat to lay into. But you want to be careful because if you have too much overhang, well then you can have like an umbrella effect and the paint can pool up and then run back down onto the panel. But if you have your tape line too far this way, well that's going to cause a hard line that you're going to have to wet sand out later. So we got Tommy in there laying down that first coat of that awesome KBC 09 organic green that we got from the boys at House of Color. What's the importance of the foundation underneath not just this paint job, but any paint job in general?
So every paint job has to have a foundation, as you said, and we'd like to look at it as like a house. You know, you want something sturdy underneath that's going to retain and hold that whatever you're building color on top of it.
Yeah, and we used a jet black as our base color. Now, how much does it affect it to use maybe like a silver or a yellow or red as your base color?
So it affects it tremendously. As you can see how dark it is on the black right now, but if you look on the paper, see how light green that is over the white? So imagine that transition if you had a yellow underneath or a red underneath, right? So you can really create and build your own hues and colors how you want. On top of that, every coat of the KBC you add is going to brighten it, so you're getting a different hue that way too. So you really have a lot of control on building the color you want.
You've been doing this a long time. What kind of technique do you feel like has given you the best success rate for these kind of paint jobs?
So the ongoing saying with House of Color is like a robot. A robot is nice and straight line thinking. So you want to make sure you keep a nice even pattern. You don't want to follow the body lines, just keep it parallel every time with about a 75% overlap. and that helps keep it nice and even as you drop down.
Building a vehicle is supposed to be fun. Yeah, it's a lot of work, time, and money, but it's an opportunity for you to take something that is in your mind and bring it to life. It's hard to explain to others what your vision is, and sometimes they don't know it until they see it. But one thing's for certain, it sure feels good to be able to work with your hands and turn one of those dreams into a reality. We still got a lot more work to go, but completing this is a huge step in the right direction. Once you start a fancy paint job like this, you need to pay attention to your dry times. At some point, you can stop, while others, it means you're working late into the night, all alone, just grinding it out. Just keep your eye on the prize, because most good things don't come easy. And all that hard work and sacrifice will pay off. Gonna be a straight kind of morning.
Ooh, nothing like a good night's rest. How'd it go last night?
Not too bad. It was kind of plentiful and plenty long.
How'd the car turn out, though?
Pretty nice, I have to say. Pretty nice.
Let's check it out.
Go right ahead.
Man, you absolutely knocked it out of the park, Tom.
It's not too bad at all, man.
How many coats of clear did you end up doing?
Well, if I was to tell you, I'd be in violation of the tech sheet, man.
Man, she looks good. Can we roll it out and take a better look at it?
Yeah, it's dry enough.
All right, let's do it. You can go ahead and start pulling whenever you're ready.
I'm trying. You even pushing back there? I guess you probably are, just not much. Well guys, on this episode, that big body sitting behind me has made some dramatic improvements in curb appeal.
Tommy and I have sunk hours and hours into the prep work on this old boat, and it's finally nice to just kick back and enjoy the fruits of our labor. And gotta say, pretty sweet. After sanding our old Caprice to bare metal, we laid down some epoxy primer, followed by several rounds of polyester. We bounced back and forth between the body and the rest of the panels, but we had to paint the front fenders and header panel at the same time as the doors and body to ensure a consistent color all the way down our big body bow tie. Now, it wasn't too long ago when our old Caprice had that worn out and weathered look going for it and was in dire need of some TLC. We found old Fat Stack sitting in a driveway just begging to be rescued. We could tell she had potential, but the very first step was just cleaning off all those years of mud and crud.
Now with us swinging by the car wash, not only gets all that dust and debris off the windshield, but this thing was sitting up under an old hackberry tree, and those things are notorious for dripping off a bunch of black sap. Removing that now will keep us from getting all sticky later. When it comes to upgrades, some of the first things that we kicked off was the suspension and power plant. And with Fat Stack being full figured, well, we knew we were gonna need some serious equipment. When we test drove Fat Stack, she handled like a literal land yacht. So we upgraded her suspension with a trick set of coilovers, tubular upper and lower control arms, 4-wheel disc brakes, and a 9-inch rear axle to boot. All of that to handle our crown jewel, a home-built 800 plus horsepower Supercharged LS. Now, if I don't see another sanding block anytime soon, it's not gonna hurt my feelings. We put in more time than I want to talk about, but it shows in the shine we're getting from that candy paint. All that work means no vinyl top today, but there's always tomorrow. With Fat Stack on the rotisserie all shined up, well, that's a huge accomplishment behind us. Now comes the fun part. We get to screw and glue this thing back together.
Yeah, and big picture wise, we still have a whole lot of work to do, but if that paint job is any indication of how the rest of this build's gonna go, I'd say we're headed in the right direction. Today we've got our 71 Caprice project that we've christened as Fat Stack back in the shop, and we're stoked about it. This candy green paint's looking pretty sharp, but now it's time to address the lingering issue that's lying below the surface. And luckily what we have up our sleeve is fast, easy to do, won't cost $1 million, but it'll sure look like it when it's done.
Along with that, we're going to conquer our fuel system. We've got to push some petrol from out back toward the front to feed that 800 horsepower Supercharged LS. And then finally, with these two things taken care of, we can drop that green body onto our chassis. We're in kind of a predicament with our old tank here. With that old big body, well, it's kind of an odd duck car, and they don't offer an OEM replacement tank for one of them. Our plan is to run an aftermarket in-tank style pump. And what it requires you to do is to cut a hole in your tank and mount it and then plumb it as accordingly. Now, before you go to punching holes or throwing sparks, you have to remember this thing carries an explosive fuel on the inside, and you don't want to hurt yourself or anyone else, so you need to make sure that you flush one of these things out before you even try to do any kind of modification. We're going to start off by knocking the locking ring off and then pulling out the sending unit. This will allow us to drain the tank properly to get everything out of the inside of it. Once that's done and the inspection checks out, we can give the inside a good bath.
We're using a fuel tank repair kit that we got from POR 15. It comes with a cleaner, metal prep, and a sealer. First step is to mix the cleaner with some warm water, and then you're ready to pour it in the tank. After that, just slosh it around.
With our tank not smelling like fuel anymore, it's time for us to plan our incision. Now with that, there's a couple of things that you need to keep in mind. One is oftentimes there's baffles inside of here and you don't want to make a hole, and then the next thing you know, you're on top of one of those. That just complicates everything. The next thing is your fuel sender. A lot of those have a swinging arm, and if you get too close to it, well, you may run into interference. That's not good either. With our plan, we're going to mount our pump right here toward the back. This is good for a couple of reasons. There's no interference, and it actually makes the installation of the hoses relatively easy. If you were to mount this thing up here, well, you're going to have to build a big long trough and hope there's enough clearance between the top of the tank and the bottom of the trunk pan. I'm using some 18 gauge standard old sheet metal to make my panel. Just got to drill a few holes for the mounting ring and slide the pump in. Then it's off to the metal brake to bend the tabs. Now to mark off my little notch or recess here, I'm going to use this flat piece of metal, lay it on top of the tank, slide it across, measure from the bottom of that. That should give us our measurement. My fit is kind of roughed in, I guess you would say. What I'm going to do is tack this thing into place in a couple of spots, grind off this excess lip, and then finish burning everything in. Well, with our pocket all welded up and dressed, it's time for us to install our fuel pump. We're going to be using a unit from Phytech. Now this is a pretty significant piece. It will support up to 1,000 horsepower. Now before we can install this thing, well, we need to do some measuring. What you want to do is measure from the top of the tank to the bottom and see where you're at. Now we're at 6 inches of it. So we need to make sure that we position our pump and the little pickup screen about 1/8 of an inch off of the floor of the tank. And we're going to cut this piece of plastic off right about here and then heat it up so that we can slide the pump into this tube. Once you get the clamp tight, all you need to do then is take and zip tie your pump to the little metal bracket and then you need to trim off your return tube about 1/4 inch from the floor of the tank at a 45. Now to wire up your pump, you just have a simple connection that you push together. To attach this pump into the tank, it comes with this little ring that I used to make that template earlier. You've got a couple of screws that you screw back through here, and you kind of snake this thing in there, and then you just bolt everything up. Little manhandling, nothing crazy though. That one? Well, looks like that's gonna do it for a mock-up. Now with this little notch that we did, you can see that it's considerably lower than just setting on top of here. Now with this type of modification, we did create a small issue. This is just mild steel and it's gonna flash rust if you were to put fluid inside of here. But I've got the solution for that as well. After cleaning this tank, we went ahead and used some of the metal prep to aid in the adhesion of the sealer. The final step to coating our gas tank here is going to be installing some POR 15 tank sealer. You just simply pour it in and then flip the tank around to make sure that you coat the inside of it. Now after you do that, this stuff needs to dry for 96 hours before you pour the fuel back into it. It's that simple. Now I'm trying to get this stuff coated all over every square inch. If you notice, I'm moving the tank around in multiple directions, giving it time for it to kind of run across everything. We'll do it for a while this way and then flip the tank over. Works really well when you're in a situation like we are, when you have a fuel tank that no one offers. It gives you an opportunity to repair it. I got the tank standing up on its end. That's going to allow everything to settle to one side. We'll remove the excess. Once that dries like it's supposed to, well, we'll be good to go.
Now from the factory, this old big body had these pre-bent steel lines that ran along the inside of these frame rails from a low pressure sending unit up to a small block Chevy. And unfortunately for this application, that's just not going to work. A lot of modern day fuel injection systems operate in that 40 to 60 PSI range, so you're going to need adequate plumbing to accommodate that. What you're also going to need is what is known as a return line running back to your tank. When planning out your fuel system, there's common parts that you will be using. First is the fuel tank, which is the reservoir for liquid dinosaur juice. Then there's your pump, your filter, your lines, a regulator, and finally, your injection unit. This setup is basic. The pump draws fuel out of the tank and pushes the fluid toward the engine. With an inline unit, you want to install the pump within 3 feet of the tank and mount it as close as possible to the bottom. Usually, pumps are pushers, not pullers. If you mount it too high, sometimes the pumps can struggle to draw the fuel out of the tank. Fuel filters do just what their name suggests. Filter the fuel as it passes through them. The next connection is determined by the injection system you're planning to run. If your unit doesn't have a pressure regulator built in, you will have to install one. Failure to do this can damage components, causing tuning issues and poor performance. Oftentimes, regulators have multiple ins, outs, and a return. This return is what bleeds off the excess pressure supplied by the pump and returns it back to the tank. Our plan of attack is to keep the fuel system on Old Fat Stack clean, simple, and serviceable. So we called up the guys at Phytech and they sent us over this black stainless steel fuel line kit that is specifically designed for high performance applications. First thing we're going to do is mock up our fuel lines along the frame rails, and then we'll move on to pressing on some fittings. Now, our new lines are basically going to run along the same route as the factory ones on the inside of these frame rails, but we do have to do some modifying to these frame holes to accommodate the larger size of hoses. After cutting out our holes, I went ahead and installed these new grommets to ensure that our new hoses wouldn't get cut by those sharp edges. With our supply line roughed into place, now's a good opportunity to see where we want to plumb in our inline filter. And this is kind of where the serviceable side of things comes into play. You want to put this in a spot that's easy to get to, therefore easy to swap out if you ever need to. Looks like right about here, do just fine. Phytech offers special tape that keeps the braided material tight for when you're adding your fitting. I like to apply a small amount of assembly oil on the threads of these fittings, and a little bit goes a long way. When tightening this up, you want to make sure the nipple seats properly into the socket. Also, remember these things are directional. Often, they'll have an arrow to indicate flow and show you which direction it needs to be mounted. Now, when it comes to physically mounting your lines to the frame, you want to use a style of clamp that's not going to latch in and squeeze them, because that's going to restrict your flow. You want something that's going to allow enough play for suspension travel, but also hold everything in place. Perfect. Now all we need is a couple lines running to the tank and the fuel rails, and the fuel system is plumbed. I tell you, it's a lot easier without the body on the chassis. Well guys, there's one thing left on the itinerary before we're ready to set Fast-Ac's body back on its chassis, and that would be spraying on some undercoating. And when it comes to that stuff, man, there's all different kinds out there. What we plan on using is a professional grade truck bed liner for multiple reasons. 1, it's tough. 2, it deflects a lot of road debris and moisture. And 3, looks pretty good when you're done. But there is some extra prep work involved. And step 1 is to scuff the undercarriage, and that is going to give the coating a good surface to latch onto. So I'm going to get to work scrubbing off some ugly. I'm just using a regular red scuff pad to scrub this down and give the bed liner some tooth. You'll probably also want to pressure wash any dirt or debris off your undercarriage before you start scuffing. This isn't your run-of-the-mill overspray. We've put hundreds of hours into this paint job, and with that said, we're taking special care when masking up old Fat Stack. Well, we got everything masked off, prepped, and ready to go. We do have a couple of bare metal spots that need touched up with some black epoxy primer. We'll get that done, and then this thing's pretty much ready for some bed liner. Now with our epoxy flashed off, let's take a minute to talk about the product that we're working with. Now we went out and got us a 2-stage urethane-based bed liner, and that's going to give us that stern toughness we need to make this project last a long time. One of the most overlooked advantages of a good undercoating would be the sound deadening aspect. Now earlier I took 2 scrap pieces of sheet metal, and on this one I sprayed some rubberized undercoating, and on this one some industrial bed liner. And just in comparison weight-wise, this thing is way more dense. And also, check this out. Hear that difference? And even though there is a little more prep work and mixing involved in comparison to an aerosol can, the overall quality of the product speaks for itself. The viscosity of this bed liner is thick. On a normal paint job, most people spray between 15 and 20 psi. And this stuff requires 3 times that. We're running it in a well-ventilated area with plenty of space, because you don't want to get this stuff on the walls of your workshop. Well guys, I have to say, for only a few hours of labor, this thing has made a complete transformation. Heck, looks like a brand new car. Not only does it have the finish we were looking for, It's also going to add on decades of protection, sound deadening, and even a little bit of insulation. Now comes the fun part. It's finally time to marry this thing back to the chassis.
It's been a long time coming, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It's gonna look pretty sharp, I think.
Let me know if you see any causes of concern. Think this lift could go any slower?
Looks good so far, but the suspense is killing me.
Be sure to take your time when marrying the body back to the chassis. Keep an eye out for anything catching or not lining up properly.
Got those bolts. And don't forget, you're starting your body bolts into a caged nut. So start slow, and once they're seated, go ahead and cinch them down.
We knew this aged out green relic had a solid foundation for one heck of a build. The floor and trunk pans looking this nice after a simple respray is really saying something.
And green isn't for everybody. If you can make a green car stand out, to me, you've accomplished a rare feat. We've been chomping at the bit to see our 71 Caprice back together just to check out the stance. And I do believe we've nailed it.
From where we began, Fat Stack is finally starting to look the part. To make a transformation this drastic, well, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time and effort to get to this point. Now, we still have a lot more work to do, but I have to say, when we're all said and done, this thing is going to be one impressive piece.
And from the perspective of a couple of car guys, this is truly what it's all about. And hitting these big milestones, man, they can really lift your spirits. And when you take a step back and consider all the cool stuff we still got to put on this car, including a vinyl top, some bright work, trick interior, dude, this thing is gonna look killer.
I can't wait to see the chrome, those skirts on the back. This thing definitely is going to be cool.
I'm driving first this time, though.
If you're into dolling up your ride, you're going to dig what we got for you guys today. Now, you can call it eye candy, you can call it icing on the cake, or even jewelry. Chrome has that effect to just put a smile on your face. The way it twinkles and glitters in the light is something special.
When you think of a boatload of chrome, a car from the 70s is probably not the first thing that comes to mind, but this old Caprice sure has a whole lot of it. What we have planned for Fat Stack is to quite simply make a statement. And between that cool candy paint and all these shiny goodies, pretty sure we're not going to have too much trouble doing exactly that.
The right mix of certain components can really elevate your build. That sheer size of that car back there is one of the reasons we went with the bigger than stock wheels. A big old car needs larger than stock rollers. 20s and 22s may not be your style, so if you're a bit more old school, we got something coming up later in the show that'll tickle your fancy. Cars of the late 60s, 70s, and 80s had an option for you to top it all off, and sometimes they got a bit crazy and exotic. It all depended on your own flavor and maybe even your occupation.
To do chrome like this requires professional help, so we're going to take a little field trip, and you can sit back and see if you like your reflection. Advanced Plating in Portland, Tennessee is world-renowned for their quality and expertise when it comes to crafting shiny chrome. They've plated just about anything you can imagine, and their show-stopping work has helped skyrocket the status of many award-winning builds. Their taste and expert-level artistry are perfectly in sync with the prestige we envision for our 71 Caprice. After we got to peep some of their handiwork, we got revved up thinking about what Fat Stack is going to look like with fresh, new Brightwork.
Good chrome can be the ultimate accent for paint, and it can make certain features of your project stand tall. Doesn't matter if it's a fixed up grille, a shiny set of refurbished rims, or even a custom chrome steering wheel.
Like most car lovers, Steve Tracy has a fondness for all things automotive and holds a deep bond etched in his heart when it comes to cars and shiny chrome. Over the years, he has combined his love for classic cars with his never-ending drive for refining perfect plating processes to transform pieces of Detroit muscle into mesmerizing metallic works of art.
Since 1988, Steve has been the owner of Advanced Plating, where he has mastered the alchemy of transforming tattered trinkets into perfectly polished chrome.
I really thrive on the challenge of restoring these parts or developing processes for plating. You know, I've fortunately been very active in the development of electroplating with chemistry and plating on aluminum over the years. Challenge of taking a piece of metal, restoring it back to way beyond what it was ever looked like to begin with is really what is very rewarding to me. But what also is really rewarding to me is the amount of people that we have that work here that have the same passion as I do. These people come in here driven to do the job and do the best job they can. They're driven to put out the best product. And we take a lot of pride in our work. We try to do the best possible job in every piece. And that's really rewarding to me also. I mean, I love seeing the employees here at Advanced Plating take pride in what they do. And that's a big part of it to me. You know, we're going to continue to be cutting edge and developing new finishes. And Advanced Plating as a whole is set up for the long haul in the future. So not only that our employees have a future, but also we're customers who have been coming here for years, still are coming here and still getting the same quality.
Everyone wants your bumpers to look great, and these, to call them that, is an understatement. Now, with the components that they started with, were nowhere near this condition, and they had their work cut out. Our chrome pieces had seen better days, but they were at a pretty good starting point for us to send them off to get a second lease on life. Chrome isn't something you can easily do on your own. Getting our chrome out of a rattle can just didn't line up with the level of restoration we were doing on Fat Stack. So we asked Steve to show us how he took our pieces from worst to first.
Well, how about we take a journey on the pathway that your parts followed?
That sounds good. Kind of excited to see. Hope it wasn't a long journey.
It was a pretty long journey.
Yeah?
You know, you had a lot of parts there, a lot of aluminum, originally anodized.
Yeah.
But we went with chrome, and I think you're going to be real happy with the results. But getting there, labor of love for everybody involved. So we're here in the strip room, and we're going to start by stripping the anodizing off of a grill. This is a pretty interesting chemical reaction because we strip anodizing off of aluminum and then caustic, and caustic destroys aluminum. You have to stand with this part while it actually is removing the anodizing, and if you sit in here for too long, it will actually dissolve the part away. And you can see the caustic reaction and the oxidation happening. Now he's going to come over to a clean water rinse. So we're going to do a dip in the nitric acid, and this is commonly referred to as a bright dip. So we're brightening up the aluminum so that the polishers have a clean canvas to do their metal prep on. There is an art to stripping.
Amen.
And I'm not talking about dancing either. It's really important that all the old paint, rust, grease, and oil and anodizing is removed off of all the parts so that when we polish the part, it's done properly. We don't want our polishers trying to sand off or grind off debris.
Yeah.
So getting the strip properly is really important. So Tommy, Joel, we're in the buffing room in here. Right now, Matt is basically roughing it in with a 800 grit DA paper. So he's gonna get it prepped and then buffed and we'll be ready to go to racking. We use copper plating the way a body man uses filler and primer, and that's our restoration tool. So, you know, Bondo on, Bondo off, copper on, copper off. All right, guys, so we are out here in racking, and the racks are made out of solid copper for conductivity, and these wires that he's put on the end are called cheaters, and they're going to defer the current from the end of the part, and this keeps it from overplating on the end. It's kind of like the edges when you're doing paint on a door or a trunk. Your edges are going to get more paint on them, right? And so for us in electroplating, we do try to defer it to keep the buildup down. Still going to have to watch the edges for fit. Okay, so we're with Will here on the plating line. We're getting ready to run some aluminum trim. We're entering the nitric acid, and this basically is etching the aluminum to help with adhesion. This is all timed. And he's standing there counting as he goes. When he goes into this zinc tank, this is not electrolytic. This is electroless zinc, and this is putting a deposit of zinc onto the part. Now this part thinks it's a piece of zinc die-cast. Copper plating will not adhere to raw aluminum. It has to have this zinc put on it. And now you can actually see the zinc coating that's on that part, that color change. Now we're gonna do a cyanide copper stripe. Really important for adhesion. The trick is to go into this copper tank with current on the part. So current on the part, and then we drop down into the solution. And right now you're seeing the copper ions going from the anode to the cathode. But this bath, regulated current, regulated temperature, regulated amperage. Now you can see the copper strike. That's not a thick deposit. That is for adhesion. So from there, he's gonna move to a clean water rinse. So he's moved through a cyanide destruct and another rinse, and we're gonna go to nickel next. Nickel ions are depositing onto the aluminum part, and it's getting bright, and the chemistry allows it to become level. Will's coming around with our nickel-plated pillar post, and he's ready to go to chrome. He's gonna do what we call a sour dip here. This is gonna cut the brightener film off the nickel-plated part, and then from there, he's gonna go into our hexavalent chrome bath. So the average dwell time in here, you're gonna get maximum deposit in 30 seconds.
Wow, that quick.
This bath will not build thickness. It's a transparent. You're looking through the chrome at the nickel. So you're really looking at the beauty of what the metal polisher has done, what the nickel has done to provide us depth and brightness. And now you have the chrome as a nice silvery blue deposit, gonna give you transparency and corrosion protection at the same time. And then our final step here, we use a DI water rinse for a spot-free rinse.
Our lower quarter trim was beat all up on fat stack. You can check out the back side of this panel where there's some tooling marks from them having to do some metal work. But check this stuff out right now. That is nice. Can't wait to see this stuff against that green paint. Let's just try one on.
Well guys, the moment is upon us. We've been frothing at the mouth to get a new vinyl top installed on our 71 Caprice Project Fat Stack, and today's the day we make it happen. The story of this age-old accessory can be dated back as early as the 1920s. Their initial purpose was to give fixed-roof vehicles a comparable flair and appeal to their convertible counterparts. As time went on, they would eventually become a fairly common option on a lot of muscle cars from the 1960s. From there, they would evolve into many different styles of materials, including canvas, snake, alligator hides, oh, and those classy mod tops that Chrysler introduced in '69. Even your old Aunt Edna would admit those things were tacky at best. Back in the day, it wasn't uncommon for vehicle manufacturers to glue the tops straight onto bare steel. The problem with that is at some point, you get a pinhole in the liner, and that draws in moisture and corrosion. Arguably, one of the biggest reasons a lot of guys tend to steer away from vinyl tops is because of the rust issues involved. And having to cut off and weld in a new roof skin on your project isn't exactly the easiest of tasks. When we first got a hold of our old big body, its factory top was a little worse for wear. It was cracked, ripped, and almost completely dried out from close to 5 decades of baking in the sun. Luckily, the sheet metal underneath was solid. So we sealed it off with some epoxy primer, black base coat, and a few coats of clear to ensure our new vinyl top would have protection for years to come.
To install a vinyl top, you're gonna need a few tools. Nothing crazy or elaborate, but they are necessary. Now with the top that we're installing, it's basically brand new. If you were using some old authentic material, well, you may want to use a heat gun. A few waves of this will help to soften that vinyl up, and it can be your friend. Now the first thing that we need to do with installing our top is to make a couple of marks, get everything lined up.
First thing you want to do is find the center line of your roof, measuring from A pillar to A pillar. From there, you can start spraying your glue from the center out.
Some people right now are thinking, we just screwed up, Joe.
That's all right, we'll let them think that.
Now line your middle up, stick it and almost hold it down here.
That cross pattern to get rid of my tiger stripe.
If it's any consolation, it is oddly satisfying to watch.
Feel the burn. Feel the burn.
Calisthenics, baby.
It's not a tremendous amount of pressure. You don't want to pull them crazy tight. It's all stuck.
No going back now. That looks pretty good though. Nice and tight.
Well, we got our top stretched out and glued on, and it looks really nice. Now we're at the tedious point, and that is trimming off all this excess. If you don't pay attention now, all that hard work is out the window. On the front and back window, you have these little T-studs that hold molding clips that hold the molding of the windshield into place. Now you want to make sure when you lay this vinyl around there that you trim out around them, because if you wait till the windshield's in, oh, it's a bear. Don't ask me how I know. Now on all 4 corners of this roof, there is what looks like a T-stud, but in all reality, it is a panel nail. What it's designed to do is to compress this vinyl top here in this seam. And we left them in here so that we wouldn't lose them and we could reuse them. Now I've got to get a pair of pliers and pull this thing out. And then that hammer that I mentioned earlier, well, we're gonna be driving some nails. You know, Joel, I think that was actually easier than putting windows in sometimes.
It's definitely easier than a headliner.
At least this one's on top.
Yeah.
Not having to work upside down.
The vinyl top's already changed the entire look of the car, if you ask me.
Yeah, kind of to me, with it just being a shiny painted top car, it almost looked cheap. Now it kind of just, I don't know, I don't want to say elegant, that's not the word either, but.
I'll take elegant.
Nah, I wouldn't say elegant. Well, I'll tell you what I'm gonna say though, for sure, I'm done for the day. I'm out.
Not far behind you. It'll be here in the morning waiting for us.
Hey guys, welcome to Detroit Muscle. We're slowly chipping away at the to-do list here on Project Fat Stack, our 71 Caprice. Now what we're going to be tackling today is a couple of odds and ends. But the best part about all of them, well, they're cheap and easy to do.
Whether you're doing a full frame off restoration or just want to spruce up your weekend project, everything we've got on the agenda could really elevate your build.
Well, the first thing that we're going to conquer is install the front and rear windows into our big body. If you've got an old ride where the subject matter may pertain to you. Now, a while back, we showed you guys how to remove a windshield. A couple tips for you. Have a buddy that doesn't mind breaking a sweat. Make sure you pay attention and take your time. Utmost mandatory if you're trying to save the old piece. There's about 3 different designs for holding a window into place. One is a molded rubber gasket or weather strip. Then there's the old school round bead that's basically a piece of butyl. And then there's the urethane. Now, what we're going to be doing on the back of our car is using this rope style seal. Pretty much what you're looking to do is to take this little rope and lay it all the way around the perimeter on the body where the glass and body meet. If you've got trim and the glass is too low, trim will be loose. If it's too high, you won't get that stuff on, well, easily. Now, another thing that you want to keep in mind is this little joint, because it's not one piece. You don't really want to put it at the top because that's where the moisture comes in. I usually like to put it in the middle on the bottom side.
And one thing you want to make sure of before you go to lay this in here is that you have a nice, clean and dry base, and if you have any rust, well, you're going to want to treat that as well.
This stuff is super malleable. You can put it in many shapes and forms. And if you don't have any idea where yours was, just mock up your glass. You can use a Sharpie or a marker to go around it, and that should tell you what you need to know. Here's a little tip for you for cutting this stuff. It can be rather stringy. Just take a pair of scissors, put some glass cleaner on both sides of it, and when you clip it, it'll be a nice clean cut. Now where your 2 ends meet, it's a good idea to kind of squish them together. That'll ensure a nice, good seal and prevent any leaks. Once you get this thing all laid out, step back and look at how it's on the panel. You may have to make a few subtle adjustments because you want a nice, clean, flowing line, not all wavy and bunched up. We're going to hit this back window with some glass primer. Doing it this way helps to hide that ugly little trim edge that sometimes you'll see between the glass and your upholstery.
Well, the glass is pretty much in place, and the next step is to just go around all the edges and make sure you compress it really good and make sure you got a nice tight seal. Then you can go ahead and install your clips, snap on your bright work.
You know, oftentimes whenever it comes to glass, the only way people think it's bad is because it's broken, cracked, or has one of those bird eyes in it. But sometimes that's not the case. If you've got a vehicle that's got some age on it, seen some acid rain, or has a bunch of miles, well, the image that you see through the windshield may be a bit distorted.
Especially in comparison to a new piece. And whether it's a restoration project or a daily commuter, a new windshield can really give you a fresh outlook on the road ahead. Now in the back we used what a lot of people would refer to as the old school method, using that soft butyl. However, in the front we're going to be shifting gears a little bit and using what is known as the glue-in method, using some professional grade urethane. And the steps involved are relatively the same in the sense that we're going to be using our primer again, except for instead of using it for aesthetics, it's actually a required step. Not only do you have to put it on your windshield, but on the body as well. Now as far as tools go, all you're really going to need is a semi-automatic caulking gun and an able-bodied buddy. But first things first, we're going to go ahead and lay down some primer.
Timing is everything when you're applying glass primer. You want to take your time and lay it down in a nice even coat. Also, you have to give this stuff time to flash before you set the glass. The next thing that we're going to do is install some of these clips and hardware that's going to dictate where the glass goes. Here on the bottom of the cowl, there's these little L brackets that simply attach with a screw, and they help to keep the glass from drooping down once you set it into place, because that urethane will allow it to move around a little. And also, we're going to have to put our clips on so that we can clip into place our chrome trim. If we wait and let that urethane set, well, we risk not being able to get it on. now it's time to glue. I've got a little trick that I want to show you on how to trim this tip so that it makes applying this urethane a lot better. You want to trim it so that it creates a bead that's kind of like the shape of the flame on a candle. This will help to ensure a better seal in case your surface is a bit inconsistent. That should do it.
I think you might have gave me the heavy side.
Don't stead it yet.
It's a lot better than just polishing it.
You know, Joe, I'm always amazed at how much better a project or a build looks with new glass in it.
Yeah, well, clearly, proof is...
Coming up, we're gonna get the junk out of this trunk. We're continuing our low buck fix-ups on Project Fat Stack. Now we're shifting our focus to the tail end of our big body, and usually in this area, a little bit of TLC goes a long way.
You guys are probably familiar with that old saying, the devil's in the details. And whether you're doing a full-blown restoration or just sprucing up your weekend cruiser, sometimes there are certain areas and aspects of a build that can go overlooked. For 50 years old, the trunk pan is in pretty solid shape. However, in comparison to the rest of the car, it's a little bit ugly. But for less than $100 and a few hours of your time, you can easily simulate that showroom look. To complete this task requires only a few basic tools. A scraper like this works well for removing any of that old insulation or even seam seal. From there, you can work your way up to a wire wheel or even a crud buster. But first things first, we want to try and keep our paint job out of harm's way, so we're going to mask everything off before we get started. One last thing I want to address before we get going here is the taillight harness. Now with Fat Stack, it simply unplugs from a little terminal here on the inside of the trunk. But if you don't have that luxury, well, you're probably just gonna have to mask it off and tuck it away as best you can, just so you don't get any overspray on it. Well guys, the trunk pan is in great shape, other than some surface rust and bare metal spots that we will treat with some rust preventative and black epoxy primer. Now, one more thing I want you to take a look at before you move on is your factory seam sealer. If it's dried, cracked, or rotted, or simply missing, well, you're gonna wanna fix that before you move on to your top coat. But for now, everything's looking pretty good, so we're gonna move on to the next step, cleaning.
While Joe's busy being a trigger man, I'm going to refurbish some of the old components that we're going to be installing a little later on. Now we're going for aesthetics and function here in our restoration project. Now, so that means I've got to address the wiring harness. Now one of the first things that you'd want to do is to make sure that you don't have any chafe spots or broken wires. I've looked at this stuff and it's in pretty good shape. So now we're ready to move on to make this thing pretty. First thing we're gonna do is kind of slather this thing in some concentrated solution, what we normally call brake cleaner. Now with this stuff, if you're working with a wire that could have either some printed white lines or even letters on them, you may not want to use this stuff because it can remove that. But in our situation, we're trying to brighten up the colored wires and basically get this thing clean. Now this kind of work is extremely tedious, but it's a good bang for your buck. You may have noticed that I didn't tape off all of my individual wires. If you'll just kind of pay attention with your rattle can, you should be okay. And if you were to get a little on there, just use some more of your cleaner and it'll wipe right off. Now, if you're planning to rework your harness, you may need to do some inspecting on it before you get started. Not every harness is wrapped with what you consider electrical tape. Sometimes you'll have them that instead of it being plastic tape, it's actually fabric, and then others, it's no adhesive at all. From what we started with to our end product, dramatic difference. Now let's adjust the lighting to see how our bulbs are working. Left turn, right turn, parking lights, and back up. Definitely gonna need some bulbs. Call that a success.
Well, it looks like our epoxy's finally flashed off, so we're gonna spray on our spatter paint, call this thing done. This spatter paint is a must for any worthwhile restoration. It's going to elevate our trunk band to be on par with the rest of the car. Keep in mind, you'll probably need to lay down a few coats in order to get the final finish that you're going for.
Our trunk's starting to look really nice, and it'd be a shame for all that effort to go to waste by not simply replacing the trunk weather strip. So we're going to be using this one that we got from Steel Rubber Products. Now, a while back, we had a friend of ours, Danny, stop by back when this car was in primer.
And what I noticed is people who've spent a ton of money restoring their car and have a cracked vent window seal, or the window felts are all falling apart. Just changing that up makes a huge difference as far as looks go.
People will spend money on chrome, spend money on paint and cool parts, and
Put the old glass back in.
Put the old stuff back in it. And I can understand some of it is availability and that you might have to reuse or find a really nice original part, but luckily you guys make 90% of the stuff that's on this car when it comes to that thing. Yeah, you can really elevate a build no matter what it is, just to that attention to detail, you know, and you know, my suggestion is don't buy weather strip until the car's painted. Now, I put in a few sets, but I'm gonna ask you if there's a tip or trick you got for actually installing that little weather strip that goes from the front glass to the back glass.
There are a few tips. One is if the channel piece there has been re-chromed, sometimes that adds some thickness, which can also kind of block some things. But what we really recommend is soapy water on like everything. You know, basically it's a good lubricant for rubber to slide, but doesn't dry nasty and doesn't like stay there like some silicone or anything like that. Just some soapy water and sometimes a little bit of elbow grease.
I've wrestled a few of those in there and put plenty of dish soap and all that kind of stuff on there, and it did require a cup or two of elbow grease for sure.
One of the nice things about Steel Rubber Products is we have all those tools and molds in-house. But that's one of the things that we work really hard on, is making sure that any of those issues get resolved. You know, we want it to be just like it was or better.
You ever heard the phrase, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, oftentimes people judge the quality of a build by the fit of the panels. People spend hours upon hours to achieve that perfect paint paddle or 1/8 inch gap on all your door jambs, hood, and so on. With our car already being painted, we can only do so much, but we're looking for perfection. If your ride's finished, well, you may be able to apply some of the procedures that we're about to go through to add a little bit more curb appeal or a bit more refinement to your pride and joy. If you're installing new panels that are painted, kind of like our situation, a little tip for you is to use some masking tape on all of your edges. This will help keep freshly painted surfaces from bumping into each other. Gives you a little bit of some cushion. Now remember, you're going to be pulling this stuff off, so don't put it so far in the jam that makes it difficult to untape later on. All the layers of primer and clear we sprayed on requires us to tap all the holes so that we can make sure that our body bolts go in without a hitch and not risk damaging something. Doing this will leave you with some nasty layers of shavings that you'll be tempted to wipe off by hand. Best thing you can do here is to use an air blower so you can remove all that without screwing up your paint job. Take your time when roughing in the panels. You don't want to over tighten anything that may bust up your paint or bend something. That'll require more work for you to straighten up later. As I've said before, we're going for perfection. Slow and steady is the way to go. No big hiccups, so we can go ahead and remove our tape. Now, once we get this out of the way, we'll be ready to adjust this fender. Now, this fender has quite a bit going on with it. It has a C shape or crescent shape that runs front to back. It's got a convex concave surface and 3 or 4 body lines that need to be lined up with it. It's easy to say to dial in this gap, you just simply move the fender. But what does matter is how you move it. For instance, this car has a body line that runs the length of the car. You don't want this body line to kind of hit to this point if you just matched up here, and then once it hit the fender, looks like it's drooping, because that would tell you that the front of the fender needs to go up. Now, with that said, also, you would assume that if it's drooping, that this part of the fender would be too tight at the bottom. But what you can run into is sometimes these can be kind of flexed, and you'll see that at the car show whenever this part of the fender is touching the rocker, but out front, it's kind of hanging down. That's usually a sign that the fender's too low in the front. Now, another thing is, since this body line is C-shaped, the left and right movement of the nose, well, can also affect the gap here. It'd be tight here, way wide up there if the front of the fender's too far to the driver's side. What I like to do is kind of manhandle this thing into place to see if you can get it to look really nice. If you can, it's usually a really good sign. So now we just need to put some of these body shims under these mounting points so that we can dial in our fit. Now, as I just mentioned how you move the fender around, I put 3 shims under this bolt on the top of the cowl, trying to get the top of the fender to match the top of the door. I had to take this bolt out that goes on the front of the cowl to get it to come up high enough. So that tells me that what really needs to happen is the front of the fender needs to go down so that it can pivot and lift this part of the fender up. Takes a little time, and you gotta play around with it, but just stay after it and you'll get it dialed into perfection. Well, I'm gonna call it a day, but I have to say, we got quite a bit accomplished. The big body, it's got glass in it, it's got some chrome, and it's got the trunk restored, plus Fat Stack has a shiny side. Now, next time you see it, there's gonna be a lot more green on the nose of this thing, but for now, I'm gonna go grab me something cool to drink while you all soak up that big body. Some people get tired of the conversation about LS swaps, and I get it, but love them or hate them, they're here to stay. There are shows like LS Fest that our friends at Holly host, and it's all about shoehorning late model power into anything and everything. It can be something that's super shiny and looks amazing sunbathing, or maybe going fast is what you're after. Well, that's not hard to do. Really, if you think about this, it's what hot rodding is all about. Taking a ride and putting your own twist on it. People have been doing engine swaps for years.
With LS engines, there are plenty of benefits to make any gearhead salivate. They make good power, they're reliable, economical, and there's a whole lot of them out there. We've seen 2 old boys take one, basically just clean it up, throw some horsepower in a bottle at it, and make a substantial number. Getting an engine bolted in the hole is one thing, and we covered that a while back. Now it's time to take care of some of the particulars of the operation functions.
Let's get into the cooling system. Now, from the factory, the radiator upper inlet comes through here on the driver's side. Now, that's not the end of the world, but sometimes things get a little bit complicated because our air tube is going to be running across here as well. So, we've got a bit of an easier way. One thing cool about this big body GM is that it shares components with a full-size GM pickup truck. So, LS Swap C10s are very popular. And with this Pro LS conversion radiator that we found at Summit Racing, well, that's going to make this installation a breeze. It has number 16 threaded bungs that allow you to use either an AN fitting or a screw-in hose nipple like this. They make them in multiple sizes, and you can choose the proper one that's needed for your application. Also, with us making some pretty significant horsepower, we needed to upgrade our radiator anyhow. Now let's talk about the connections you're going to have to make with the hoses for your cooling system, or let's say heater. They're located here on the passenger side of the water pump. There's a big one and a little one. Super crazy simple. It just runs up here and connects to the big one and the little one as well. Just match the sizes. The next thing I'm going to talk about is this steam port. Now what this thing is designed to do is to bleed off the air here in the cylinder heads. What you'll run into is your water outlet and your thermostat is below this point. And this connection needs to be made either one, into the water pump, two, use one of the little hose connections that's got a port in it, or what we're gonna do, connect into our fancy new radiator because it has that solution made for us. Now, if you're not looking to run a heater, they make a loop for those things, and that's what I would recommend you use. Don't try to use those little rubber caps because them things have been known to burst, and when they do, well, they'll evacuate your cooling system in a hurry.
The next subject matter that we're going to cover is something that just might stump your counterman there at the auto parts store. Now, as far as a direct application radiator hose for a Supercharged LS 371 Caprice, well, there isn't one. So in situations like these, you might have to get a bit creative and literally build your own hose. For the sake of form and function, ideally you would have a one-piece connection running from one fitting to the next with no interruptions. Now this may require several trips to the auto parts store to get the size, style, and angle that's going to fit your application. Now you guys have probably seen one of these before, and all it is a little plastic fitting that goes between two radiator hoses, and you can clamp them together in case you have a blowout going down the highway or something like that. But again, this is not a permanent solution. And over time, eventually, they literally melt. So a lot of times what me and Tommy like to do is grab one of these 1.5" style aluminum tubings and use this to splice our hoses together. And what's great about these is that they last a long time, they're not gonna rust, and if you got a little bit of exposure here, you can polish this edge or even paint it so it looks nice and clean underneath the hood. And once you've got your plumbing finalized, it's time for your final step, your clamp selection. These heat treat clamps have become really popular lately in OEMs along the assembly line. And to install one of these, you just simply slide it over your hose and then use a heat gun to shrink it up nice and tight for a good seal. For what we got going on for Fat Stack, we're gonna go ahead and use the aluminum tubing, the heat treat clamp, and then we got some trial error to do with a few of these hoses. Now, installing an aftermarket air cleaner is one of the easiest ways to add a good chunk of horsepower to your ride. So, it's not surprising as to why it's one of the first modifications a lot of enthusiasts make. The variables involved in your selection of filter can vary from size, shape, location, and even the material that it's manufactured from. Most OEMs opt for a paper style as a cost-effective solution for mass production, but they can be the most restrictive. However, the majority of aftermarket filters are constructed from cotton gauze, which allows for much more airflow, but presents the risk of more contamination. It's not uncommon for guys to completely remove the air filter off their hot rod at the drag strip to maximize air intake and lower the numbers on their quarter-mile time. But this is not ideal for cruising down the highway, as foreign matter can quickly accumulate inside your engine. When it comes to size, two main factors can dictate the required filter: an engine's cubic inch displacement and RPM at maximum horsepower. The higher those two numbers, the more airflow that is needed for sustainable output. As many of you know, the air filter is only but one piece of your air intake system's puzzle. And a lot of times when you're doing an LS conversion, you're literally gonna have to start from scratch and build your own setup. But not to worry, there's plenty of companies out there like Summit Racing that offer kits that can accommodate any size, style, or material that you're going for. Another thing to consider is your hood clearance. Now, usually these things are pretty bulky and you could mount it straight off the intake, but if you do that, well, more than likely you're gonna have to cut a big old hole in your hood. Now, the OD on our throttle body is slightly larger than the tubing we're using, so the first thing we need to install is this reducer. This reducer is made from a flexible material, which is important because you want something that's got some give to it. Normal engine vibration combined with the filter tube being hard mounted to the body can generate a lot of energy. So you want to have something that is capable of absorbing all that. Now when you go to install your pipe, you're going to feel inclined to go ahead and push it in as far as it'll go until it seats. There's one little problem with that. You can't open the throttle blades. So make sure you back it off enough where you got enough surface area for your clamp to hold on to, and you got enough to open and close the butterfly as needed. We're gonna have to do some surgery in order to get our kit to fit. so we have to size up all our components to see what we're working with. Having a bandsaw to cut with makes this super simple. And you can use a hacksaw to get the same result. But whatever tool you do decide to use, I would also recommend using some tape to line up your cut to ensure you make it as clean as possible. Now, our air intake is running on a negative pressure system, so our setup doesn't require having a bead lock. But if you're running positive pressure, like with radiator hoses, it is recommended. After all your cutting and grinding, make sure you file down any rough spots and remove any leftover debris, so it won't get sucked up into your intake. What's cool about some of these aftermarket air filters is they have these little grommets that are built in, and they work as spacers that'll accommodate whatever size pipe you're using. And since we're using 4-inch, we need all the help we can get. Just some solid hand tightening will work just fine here. You don't want to over crank this thing and end up splitting any rubber components, because that will literally undo everything you just did. These clamps are typically pretty solid, so you just need a little squeeze with the socket snug. All right, clamps nice and tight, good hood clearance, I like it. From the factory, our Caprice came with a standard old 14-inch air cleaner, and that was fine at the time because we were only pushing a couple hundred ponies. With our new setup, we have the capability to pull enough air to support up to 1,000 horses, if we ever decide to give this heavy Chevy a little boost.
The next thing that we're going to be getting into with Fat Stack is connecting the throttle. Now, I know that may sound like a simple task, but you guys know what I mean. Oftentimes they get a bit more complicated, and we got to have one. Now with that, depending on what you're working on, well, there's really two different designs out there. One is drive-by-wire, and then the other is cable operated.
When it comes to the selection of your throttle assembly, there are basically two schools of thought. A traditional mechanical cable is going to be more commonly found on your older vehicles, while an electronic style, like this Ford getup we got on the table, is going to be a little bit more popular on the late models. And whatever make you're working with, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, doesn't matter, because they all pretty much operate the same way. The benefits of an electronic setup can vary from adaptive cruise control, better fuel economy, and when it comes to tuning one of these, it's as simple as plugging in a laptop. But one of the drawbacks, however, especially when it comes to the older vehicles, is just finding a spot to mount one of these. There are some companies out there that make adapter kits for your more popular models like a Mustang, Chevelle, Camaro, etc. that'll help you bolt this right into place. However, for something like a 71 Caprice, well, we'd probably have to get a little bit creative and do some fabrication. To keep things simple and easy, we're going to stick with the drive-by cable setup for old Fat Stack.
For our setup, it is going to require a small amount of fab work, but nothing too serious. We're going to have to make a new bracket for our cable because our old one, well, it's a bit too short. Now with it, whenever you go to fabbing up your bracket, well, there's a couple things you need to keep in mind. One is you need to make sure that the material that you make it out of, well, is strong enough to withstand the force of that tension at all times. The next thing to keep in mind is the point that you connect to the throttle in relationship to the point where you're going to be pulling from. With our setup, using this straight edge will dial us in to exactly what we need. We're making our bracket out of some approximate 90 thousandths aluminum because it's strong and lightweight. I'm going to use two separate pieces so that I can combine them to accommodate the angle that is needed to properly align our cable. You can get as elaborate as you would like to here. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I want it to be fancy, but not take several days to make. You can drill a couple holes now. Yeah, that turned out pretty nice. Didn't take a whole lot of time, and a little bit of wrinkled black on that would make it look OE made.
Now, the design of the accelerator pedal and cable assembly on a lot of these old GMs was practically the same across the board. Basically, you got a metal rod attached to a swivel, and then the cable itself is held in by a plastic button-style grommet. Now, swapping out our factory cable for our aftermarket one should be fairly easy and straightforward, especially with no interior in the car. Save me some money at the chiropractor at least. Pretty cool piece of trivia, the original pedal assembly was dreamt up by renowned Italian automotive designer Excel Arratore. You can see in his early concept art that he was ahead of his time by taking a simple mechanism and turning it into a work of art. It went through several iterations, but it was too extravagant and expensive for mass production. And if you believe that, I've got a smoking deal on an '83 Corvette, if you're interested. All right, so our cable's installed. Now all that's left to do is adjust the throw.
Now it's time to finalize our accelerator pedal, and it's super simple. Joel's gonna take care of that end, and my end, well, it's pretty complicated. I'm just gonna hold the accelerator to the floor. Now he'll lace that thing up and then open the throttle blades all the way down and then tighten it all up. Once that's done and he releases that, it should pull the pedal back up. Hey Joel, you could just click it all on there first, as long as you're not in a bind. Now we may have to tweak this just a little bit once we get carpet in it, but that's easy peasy.
Try that.
All right, let off. Looks like it works. Now if the car only ran.
Right.
Well, we're slowly but surely taking care of the to-do list on Fat Stack with our honking new air filter, twin prop aluminum cased heat exchanger, spring-loaded throttle blade. It's gonna be a lot sooner than you think. We'll be lighting the fires.
And you know, there's a common phrase that pertains to these big builds that says the last 10% will take up 90% of your time. But I promise you, if you keep chipping away at the block weekend after weekend, next thing you know, you'll be cruising the streets, riding in style.
That's right, he'll be riding in style. We all spend a tremendous amount of time to build a cool car. You know, we'll spend hours on end pulling wrenches or even days sanding on a body to ensure that the paintwork looks like $1,000,000. And what for? We don't need this stuff. What's for the sheer enjoyment of, you know, sitting behind the wheel, bumping the key, can surely put a smile on your face. Thinking about those glory days can give you the sense of some time spent in heaven. But I'm here to tell you, in the right circumstances, it can feel more like a pit stop in Hades. When you're planning a project, well, there's certain things that you gotta do. You want it to make a statement. You gotta have performance. You wanna look cool driving it. With Road Burner, I do believe we checked all those boxes. Riding around in this thing in the scorching summer heat makes you think you wished it was less bare bones and had a few pieces of some optional equipment. We want Fat Stack to be cool on the outside and the inside, so we're gonna be hooking up the AC today.
Now, a little while back, I refurbished that old heater box, and to show you how we did it, gotta take a little trip back in time. We've mentioned before that we want every detail and aspect of our 71 Caprice to look sharp, but unfortunately for our old heater box, well, it definitely stands out, but I wouldn't say in a good way. Luckily, rejuvenating one of these doesn't take a whole lot of time or money, and man, the end result can be pretty substantial. First thing you're gonna wanna check is this fiberglass hull, and if it's got any broken, cracked, or missing chunks, well, you're definitely gonna wanna repair that pronto. And this is a tedious part of a restoration that a lot of people don't look forward to, especially when it comes to working with fiberglass. Once you get your blower motor out, it's a good idea to give it a couple spins, just kind of listen for any weird noises. If you hear any grinding or scratchy sounds, well, you're probably gonna have to either replace it or rebuild it. This one, luckily, quiet as a mouse. Let's see what kind of critters have been making nests in this thing. Whew! I have found mini mice nests, hornets nests, and all kinds of things in these old heater boxes. Just a little relay. Now, initial inspection of our evaporator core is that it's old for sure, but it does appear to be in working order. Now, the best thing to do with these things is to hook a vacuum gauge up for about 30 minutes and see if you have any leaks. But if it does need replaced, well, you might have to go with an aftermarket option because a factory replacement is kind of hard to come by. Now, with everything cleaned up, we're pretty much ready to go ahead and start prepping our fiberglass pieces for some paint. Now, I like to use a red scuff pad because it's just coarse enough to shave off all those nasty fiberglass hairs, but not so coarse to where it leaves any sand scratches. Using this scuff pad gives your surface some grit, so when we lay down our clear coat, yeah, it's something to bite down and hold on to. Well, with everything prepped, we're finally ready to spray on some paint. Now, our fiberglass pieces will just get some aerosol clear coat, while our blower motor will get that semi-gloss black that's pretty similar to the factory style finish.
While Joe's busy fixing the heater box on the outside, I'm going to do my thing here on the back side of the firewall. I'm going to swap in my new Duralast heater cord that I picked up online from AutoZone Pro. Now, what's great about this thing is it's just simply nuts and bolts, and it's a direct application, so it should go in with the breeze. Now, with this thing, it wasn't leaking before, but whenever you have a car of this age and you've disturbed things as much as we have, well, that's whenever they'll start giving you a fit. And doing this right now, well, with that front half already off, most of the work's already done. So, I got a couple bolts I need to take loose, and then I can get that thing in.
With the paint on our heater box still tacking off, we're going to go ahead and shift our focus towards sprucing up our old evaporator core. One of the easiest ways to complete this task is to just go to your local home supply store, pick up one of these indoor-outdoor coil unit cleaners. For the most part, these formulas are non-acidic, but there is still some of that old school stuff running around that will straight up melt the paint off the walls. But in this case, it's going to put a nice bright shine on this old aluminum. Well, all that's really left to do is to go ahead and spray on some of this cleaner a couple more times. We'll rinse it off with some water, ready to put it back in the box. And in just a couple of hours, our old heater box went from eyesore to fully restored.
If you've got an old car with, let's say, a complete AC unit in it and it just needs to be gassed, well, there are companies out there that offer what's referred to as a retro kit, and that's all the stuff it's needed to gas it up with the 134A. But the issue with that, well, it will technically blow cool air out the vents, but it's not as cold as it could be. That's because on a condenser, your diameter of your tubes are much larger than on a 134A unit. This allows it to work more efficiently, thus giving you a cooler charge coming out the vents. So we picked up this universal unit that we found at Summit Racing. It is going to require some custom fab work, but that's just what we do. I'm just going to set this thing in here to kind of get myself a game plan. Yeah, it's going to work kind of nice. I'm actually going to offset it a little bit here to the driver's side because I got to make these hose connections over here, and that'll give me some added clearance. So I'm gonna put some masking tape up on here, start drawing this thing out. Oh yeah. Three and 3/4 wide. That may seem like a little excessiveness, but we're gonna be all in the mail. Not too bad. It's a little long, but whichever one you want, and then we'll just duplicate that on this one.
As we said before, you don't have to get too elaborate when building custom bracketry. Beauty is always in the eye of the beholder. We're just going with some medium gauge aluminum and cutting a few ridges to give it some character, just so it doesn't look like we pulled it out of the scrap bin. The main goal is that it's functional, and it needs to be able to endure a lot of wear and tear from running up and down the road. Now, the next component that we're going to address in Fat Stack's air conditioning system is the POA, or Pilot Operated Absolute Valve. Now, basically how it works is it has a thermostat that monitors line temperature. And once it gets too cold, the expansion valve closes, allowing for system pressure to rebuild along with the temperature. And once it warms back up, the valve reopens, allowing for your refrigerant to start flowing again. In terms of appearance, our new valve looks just like the old one. However, the internals have several updated benefits. And swapping it out only takes a few minutes. If you need to evacuate charged refrigerant from your air conditioning system, be sure and check to verify that you are in compliance with the proper evacuation procedures. This stuff's kind of nasty. It's like petrified dinosaur poop or something. Now, overall, this stuff's fairly malleable. You can push it and bully it into any shape you want. Ideally, you want a good tight seal around your thermostat, just so no extra air gets in there. Looks like these threads have a little bit of corrosion on them, so go ahead and clean these up. No point in putting rusty threads into a brand new valve. Probably throw on some anti-seize as well, just for good measure. With this being a universal kit, we've got some excess here on our copper line, so I'm using some pipe to add a coil so I can tuck it up and make it look nice and neat when we pop the hood. All right, cool. I think we're ready to plumb some hoses. One of the most important components that could dictate the routing and plumbing of your AC system is going to be the final resting place of your filter dryer. Now basically how this little guy works is that there is a desiccant material on the inside of here that filters out any kind of moisture or solid contaminants and keeps it out of your AC system. And this is one of those times where size actually does matter. Basically, the larger size condenser that you're running, the larger size of filter dryer that you're gonna need. If you attempt to run a large AC condenser with a small filter dryer, well, you could run into a lot of restriction of your flow. Vice versa, if you try to run a small condenser with a large filter dryer, well, the volume could overcompensate that pressure and your AC system is just not gonna perform properly. Now from the factory, our setup that came in our 71 Caprice is a little bit larger in comparison to like a Chevelle or a Camaro, but it's understandable. But we've come a long way in 50 years, and the technology on this stuff is a little bit more streamlined. Basically, you can get big condenser performance in a much smaller package nowadays. And your filter dryer is but one piece of the entire air conditioning puzzle. And how you plumb it is going to vary from project to project, but the overall concept remains the same across the board. Now, I did have to build a couple more brackets to mount our filter dryer, but at this point, it's just kind of the nature of the beast. Now, what's good about mounting it here is that it's going to be kind of tucked up and away, so once we get the grill on, won't even know it's there. Should do it.
Now the next thing that we're going to take care of on Fat Stack is our hoses for our air conditioning. Now one thing I'm going to stress to you all, if you've got a project that you're going to do an engine swap like we are, and that is save all your pieces that you take off, because you never know what you're going to run into and going to need later down the road. We're going to have to reuse this part of the line because this big fitting is OEM only. It's a big number 12, and oftentimes on the aftermarket pieces they only go up to a number 10. So what we're going to have to do is cut this piece off, cut a part of this fitting off, and weld them together. Now if you're looking to make some fittings like we are, I'm going to stress to you guys to make sure that you clean out all of that debris. I prefer to do it numerous times during the process. That helps to ensure they're as clean as possible once you're all said and done. Next thing I'm going to do is mock these up on the car so that I know how to clock this fitting. If you'll notice as I rotate it, it drastically changes the angle. Once it's all set, I'll draw a line across the two, and when I take it off and head over to the table to weld it up, I'll know exactly where it needs to be. What we're gonna do is actually have to trim off a little more of our tube here on the bottom, and then we'll cut the top side of this thing off so that it will lay in there like so, because we need to make a hose connection that goes from here down into our compressor. Now I'm just using some more of that sandpaper we had to kind of pretty the rest of my hook up here. Then we'll be able to take it over to the car, start measuring out the hose. Now we've got a little adapter that we have to mount onto our compressor Now I'm gonna suggest to you guys, if you're gonna be running some hose, always try to keep in mind the natural curvature that it has. It sure does lay a lot better using it in your favor. Sometimes when you try to make it go against that grain, well, it bends kind of funny. And whenever you go to push your AC line into here, you need to make sure that you push it all the way up to this little lip. I like to put the hose right there at the end and then make a mark here on this side. Once you push it in there, as long as this and this lines up, you know you're in all the way. Another good idea is to make you a mark across these two on both sides. What that helps to do is allow you to make sure these are lined up whenever you crimp them. If you were to twist it, well, it'll be clocked wrong and it can make it a bear whenever you go to install it. The next step with this hose would normally be you'd have to crimp it. Now that usually requires a big fancy hydraulic press of some sort, but luckily Summit Racing has a tool that you can get that allow you to do this at your own place. It will allow you to do 6, 8, 10, and 12 diameter hoses. To get started, all you need is a sturdy place to mount this thing. Now before you crimp, like I mentioned earlier, make sure everything is all lined up, because once it's squished, there ain't no backing up. With our hoses all tailored fit, you're probably thinking it's time for us to gas this system up, but that's really not the case. We've got to verify that we don't have any leaks. You have a Schrader valve here on the inside, and then you've got a couple of connections here on your filter dryer. Just verify that everything's nice and tight, and then it's time to pull that vacuum. Now we'll make a couple of connections onto our car, and then we'll let this thing run. And what that will do, it will create a vacuum on the system. We're gonna lock everything down, wait about 10 or 15 minutes to see if it will hold that number on a gauge. If everything checks out, we'll let this thing run again for about 30 to 45 minutes. That helps to remove the contaminations that's inside the lines, and then we'll be ready for our next step. We're about 29 minutes in. Yep, and it's still holding. It's exactly where we were at. So now we need to go ahead and run the system a little bit longer under that vacuum so that it will remove any air and moisture out of the system. Well, our system is all pulled down, and the normal step right now would be to gas it up. We can't really gas it up because it's not running, and it has to be so that it can cycle to get the proper readings. I can't wait to be riding in there and flipping the switch with that cool air blowing on me.
Anytime you can add modern conveniences to the style and elegance of one of these old hot rods, man, it makes a world of difference. And we got a lot done today. That old heater box is refurbished, along with a new POA valve, AC condenser and filter dryer installed, and all the plumbing to make it work. And yeah, technically none of these things are necessarily required for a build like this, but it sure does make the experience of sitting behind that wheel a whole lot more enjoyable.
Now from where you guys are at, I'm pretty sure it's easy to see that there isn't much about this ride that would be considered practical. It's leaning far more toward fun and flashy.
And everything we've got on tap today is going to pique the interest of all you muscle car guys who love that feeling of dumping the clutch, grabbing a gear, and blowing smoke straight out those rear tires. We're going to be converting this bad boy from an automatic to a manual because, quite frankly, getting to experience all that fun stuff in a big body Chevrolet, dude, it's going to equal a good time. When you're out at the track, a manual always multiplies the fun factor. Now, our old Caprice only came with a turbo 350 automatic, which served its purpose for a conventional cruiser, but wasn't what we had in mind when we envisioned turning this land yacht into a speedboat. Doing this kind of a swap is a very popular subject, and how can it not be? That feeling of cruising down the road, wind blowing in your hair, keeping your hands and feet busy, big smile on your face, gives you the sense that you're a real deal race car driver. When we built Roadburner, we checked off all the boxes for one mean street machine. Hemi power, aggressive stance, and a manual transmission with a locked and loaded pistol grip shifter. No matter your flavor of muscle car, with that shifter in your hand, you know you've got all that RPM under your command. Now, a little while back, we installed an American Powertrain T56 6-speed Magnum in efforts of giving our 840 horsepower Supercharged LS some serious backup. And yeah, it did require a little bit of surgery, but in our opinion, it's well worth the effort.
One interesting thing about these early model Chevys is that they did come with a manual transmission. However, it had nothing to do with performance, and it was all about basics. And that would be a stripped down version of these cars. 6-cylinder and 3-speed on the column. So if you know a guy that knows a guy, there are pedal assemblies that will bolt right into the hole in that car. But we're not running the manual style setup, meaning it has all those linkages and levers. We're going to use a Hydromax setup from American Powertrain. Now, I'm not real sure how all this stuff is gonna play together, but we gotta get some old parts out, some old parts back in to see what we're working with.
Despite the legroom you've got in this Caprice, it's pretty cramped under the dash. So our first step was to remove the steering column. Then we gave our rusty pedals a bath in the sandblaster and got them cleaned up and ready for a fresh coat of paint. Beautiful. Well, we got our pedal assembly all refurbished and it looks pretty sharp. Next thing we're gonna do is bolt it into the hole and just kind of mock it up and see where we need to mount our master cylinder. But another important aspect of doing a swap like this is calculating your pedal ratio. You hear numbers like 4-to-1, 5-to-1, and 6-to-1, and you might wonder what they actually mean. Those are referring to the amount of mechanical leverage you're applying to your clutch. With a 5-to-1, let's say you apply 100 pounds of pedal effort. That is the equivalent of applying 500 pounds of pressure to the hydraulic cylinder. To calculate the pedal ratio, you'll need to know two measurements. First, the distance from the pivot to the pedal pad. Then, the distance from the pivot to the center point where the rod would connect. Divide these two numbers and you will get the pedal ratio. Typically, a 5-to-1 or a 6-to-1 is suggested for a hydraulic clutch setup, but a 5-to-1 is considered optimal.
Now I've got the little plate that you would bolt on the inside of the firewall to kind of sandwich these two together to use as my template. I'm just going to lay it in here, make a couple of marks, and then punch a couple of holes. Take your top one out, if you will.
Yep, that should work. So with the master cylinder in place, you can kind of see that issue to where our push rod is too far on the right side of the clutch pedal. So what we're gonna have to do is mount this, and then we're gonna have to bend this over and down into the push rod to give us that ideal clutch pedal stroke. Now basically what I've done right here is make a little bit of a map that's gonna help coordinate our bends. So all I have to do is set our piece right here. We'll start by heating this inside edge of this all thread, and then we'll bend it out until it reaches this 2-inch mark. Then we'll come back and heat this inside edge and bend it back straight again, and that should give us the 1-inch offset that we need. Now, if you guys are doing this at home, just make sure you don't crank this vise down because you don't want to damage these threads. Now, as I'm heating this, I'm not exactly putting a whole bunch of pressure on it. I'm just kind of gently nudging it with my thumb and letting the torch do all the work. Kind of alleviates any possibility of stress cracks and that kind of stuff. That is pretty dang close. I think that's worth at least a trial fit. All right, we got our rod for a clutch pedal lined up perfectly with the master cylinder. All it's left to do is to cut off this excess, which sounds like a simple task, but believe it or not, there is a right way and a wrong way to do that. When it comes to cutting any kind of all thread or even a bolt, your #1 priority is protecting your threads. So I've got a couple of jam nuts here that I'm going to go ahead and screw down to my mark, and I'm going to use that as kind of a protector for when I cinch it down into the vise. To make the connection from our clutch push rod to the master cylinder, we're going to be using this little coupler nut. And there's actually a little bit of a debate amongst some of you hot rodders to how much threading you need to make one of these strong. Not to worry, it's actually a mathematical formula to figure that out. The first thing you're going to need to know is the diameter of the rod you're working with times 1.5. In this case, it's 5/16 times 1.5. 5/16 as a decimal is 0.3125 times 1.5 equals 0.468, or just under 0.5. So we're going to go ahead and round that up to 1/2 inch just to be on the safe side. All right, so we got 1/2 inch of threads on both sides of the coupler, so we're good to cut. You can kind of see on the end of our rod, we've got a nasty little burr sticking up, but this is actually where one of these little jam nuts comes in handy. All you gotta do is back it off, and that'll kind of recomb the threads and give it a nice smooth transition. From there, we'll file it down flat and then hit it with the belt sander for a nice smooth beveled edge. That should do it.
We have all the components in place for our clutch setup. The reservoir's up top, the master cylinder and pedal is all adjusted, and our lines have ran. Now, if you've ever tried to bleed a hydraulic clutch setup, you know that it can be a daunting task. It seems like you work and don't ever get anywhere. But there's a few things that if you keep in mind, we can make it go a whole lot smoother. We have a simple drawing up here on our board to explain kind of the ins and outs on a hydraulic clutch setup. Up top, you'll have a reservoir that feeds the entire system. Now, it does that via gravity. Next, you'll have a clutch master cylinder. That's what creates the pressure. As you actuate the rod, that will push fluid toward the slave cylinder. That is what will release your clutch disc. With your slave cylinder, that's where the bleeder is located. That's where the air will escape the system that you're trying to fill. All you're trying to do is to get air out and completely fill the fluid. This is where you can run into those problems. Next thing is your line. Try not to ever loop that thing. Sometimes with your clutch masters, they don't move a tremendous amount of fluid. And if you put that loop in it, when the fluid comes up, it kind of settles across and then drains back. Having your line run in a continuous downhill motion, well, will save you quite a bit of headache. Third thing, pay attention to how you mount your slave cylinder lines coming in and out. You notice with ours, the bleeder is on the top. That's because you want it to fill from the bottom and push all the air out as you go up. Now next, let's talk about bleed theory. The first and most common is the one that we're all used to. You know, you've probably done it with your old man. Somebody's pumping the brake pedal and somebody's cracking the line. And that can work, but I've ended up giving up. The next one is gravity bleed. You know, that's where you just basically fill it up and let the fluid run all the way down. And I'm gonna say that works really well to get half the air out. Now, the way we're gonna do it causes you to have to go about things a little bit backwards. We're actually gonna draw fluid all the way from the bottom to the top.
One of the biggest hurdles you can run into when installing a modern power plant into an old vehicle is setting up your ECU. Now, luckily, the guys at Holley have really simplified this entire process with their Terminator X engine management system. Whether it's a Coyote, Gen 3 Hemi, or in this case an LS, the entire kit comes complete with plug-and-play tuning, adaptability, and even boost control, which will come in real handy with that big old supercharger. And for all you junkyard warriors out there who don't mind breaking a sweat and pulling all those old parts out of a Yukon or a Denali, this entire setup will save you a whole lot more time and get you cruising on the streets that much faster.
Now, our bleeder line is a little bit short, but that's kind of how it goes. Now, ideally, you'd want to take and kind of submerge your fitting into a cup. That gives you a reservoir to draw from. But what we're gonna do in this situation is install a little bitty line that's gonna gain us some extra clearance here under the car. Now, if you did want to go this route, you need to make sure that you submerge this entire fitting into the fluid. It can draw air out of the top side if you were just to break that fitting loose. All right, let's let the car down. It's recommended to use a .3 or a high temp .4 in this application. Now we're going to be using this ultra high performance fluid that we got from EVC. Now to do all the work of pulling that fluid uphill, we've got a little vacuum pump like you'd find at your normal parts store. We're going to connect this clear hose to the little feed line that would connect to your reservoir. Before we pull that vacuum, we need to make a small adjustment. We'll pull this thing up to help remove that air pocket. Now as you pump this thing here, you'll notice that the gauge needle will move, indicating the vacuum. Whoop, we got fluid coming up. Now you want to make sure that you don't run out of fluid down there in the floor, because if you do, it's going to pull air back through your lines. Now with this, I like to run probably about 8 to 10 ounces of fluid through here. That'll help ensure that there is absolutely no air trapped in that line. Now all we need to do is raise the car back up and remove our little line. And with this line plugged off, the fluid won't run back downhill. You got to think of it as if you've got a fountain drink with a straw in it, how you put your finger over the top, pull it out, and the fluid stays up in there. Well, exactly the same thing. You want to make sure that this line is running straight up and down, not laid off to the side, because otherwise it'll let that fluid out. There will be some that comes out of here once I crack this fitting up top, but it will only be from this point to that joint. Last couple of things we need to do is reattach our hose back to the reservoir, top it off, and then slide our master cylinder back down and then attach that pedal. Then we should be good to go. Well, we got one more thing taken care of on old Fat Stack, but we still have the steering and the brakes that we're going to have to address. It's funny how that little short list we had keeps getting longer and longer.
Hey guys, welcome to Detroit Muscle. We got our 71 Caprice Fat Stack back in the shop looking like $1,000,000. Now while you were gone, we got a little more work done by installing the hood, deck lid, and a few chrome trinkets. But now it's time to address the soul of this beast, which would be the interior.
Most of the time when people think of that subject matter, seats come to mind. Now we're nowhere near ready to drop these things in yet. We have some upgrades to do and some beautification work. Now when it comes to the interior on Fat Stack, we pretty much have a blank canvas because the only upholstery that's really in there is the headliner and the dashboard. Now, if you'll remember back, we made an upgrade on this car and converted it over to a 6-speed manual. So we're gonna have to do an upgrade on our steering column because that factory one, well, it isn't gonna cut it. We've got a couple of issues with trying to reuse this old column. And what that would be is this big chrome shifter hanging off to the side. With us now having that shifter in the middle, well, we don't need this one, obviously. Some people would knock the pin out and pull that shifter out. But we don't want to do that because then that ugly little stub is still on there. We want to build something a bit nicer than that. So we're going to have to go down the path of using something aftermarket. We went to Summit Racing and found this unit. It's made by I Did It and it's designed to fit a 69 to 72 Chevelle. It's drastically similar. From here to here, it's identical. However, from here to here, it's about 2 inches shorter. Now, if you're looking to do a conversion like this, there's a lot that goes on with it. You need to keep in mind the mount, upper and lower. These both have to be solid points. You don't want anything moving around and flexing. Next would be your electronics. Now, this kit comes with some items that helps to make that transition a whole lot smoother. We're going to transfer our old brackets off the column onto this new one. Another unique feature on these steering column brackets, is these little things are designed to be a shear point, meaning if the car is involved in an accident and the column starts to come back through, these things pull out of this bracket and allow the column to move around instead of kind of pushing back up on you. According to my research, this will either do one of two things, work or not. Yep, like a glove. Now we got this piece off and we managed to not tear it, which is cool, but it doesn't look the best. But what's cool about a piece of rubber is you can recondition this if you've got a sandblaster. Let me show you what I'm talking about. What we use in our media blaster is crushed glass. Now the technique to this is relatively simple. You just dial your pressure back to get started. You don't want to get all up close and personal with the nozzle to the piece that you're blasting. If you'll pull back from it a bit, you can kind of fan it across it. That will slowly remove all that funkiness off that piece of rubber. Now if the pressure's too low, with it starting low, you can always dial it up without damaging the component. Just get a feel for this, and then you should be able to come back with a pretty nice piece when you're all said and done. Well, check that out. It made a dramatic improvement. Now I just need to blast and paint my other bracket so I can bolt this thing in, and then we can give that column kind of a test spin. The next thing that we need to do is connect our steering column to the gearbox. Now originally, this was the thing that came out of our car, and it won't work with our new column being 2 inches shorter. So we're gonna have to go a little bit different route. Now with this thing, we wanna have a similar design for a couple of reasons. The design of this shaft is collapsible. How that is a benefit, if the vehicle is ever involved in an accident, this thing will shorten up. If it was a solid piece like this, it can't be compressed, and that will drive everything in that steering column back towards you, which is dangerous. The other thing that we're wanting to do is make sure that we install a rag joint. This helps to dampen the vibrations that comes through the suspension that can be transferred from the gearbox, through the shaft, through the steering wheel, and back to your hands. Now the first thing we're going to do is assemble our little joint here onto the shaft, and this is the one that would connect to the steering column. Now you want to always pay attention to how much of this is slid through your joint here. I like to have it basically flush with the top. That isn't mandatory, but you want it really close. And once we get everything set the way we will, we'll have to take this apart and put dimples under there. Now this takes a little bit of some finagling, kind of wiggling parts around. You just want to make sure that you keep in mind that you have enough spline or shaft slid up into each one of those joints. You don't ever want to have it too close where it could possibly come out, because this is how you're going to steer the car around. And once I get all these kind of dialed in, I want to make a mark around each shaft in the joint. Once you get it marked, you just want to take everything all the way back apart. Now to make our notches, I just used a round file and made a notch right here on the top of the tube, and I did that also back here in the back. Now on another side of that, I had to drill a hole in there so that this stud can go all the way through this tube. I'm gonna slap this thing in and see what it looks like. Man, that dude's gonna have all kind of jack. Now that we got our steering column in, we can get onto that dash. Now the next thing that we're wanting to tackle on old Fat Stack is addressing the dash. Luckily for us, our gauge cluster and all is in pretty good shape. Now one unique feature with the 71s as opposed to the cars later in life, these cars have a black dash in them. The cars that came a little later, they have usually a color match piece, meaning if the dash is green, well that piece over there is probably green as well. If you have one of these that doesn't have any flaws in it, well, I have to say, you've got one rare and hard to find piece. Now, the next step that you can do is a very economical repair, and that's the route that we're gonna take. If you're looking to paint or coat any of your interior components, I can't stress to you enough to clean everything, because normal coatings that you apply to kind of bring back the shine and stuff on interior pieces, well, paint and them don't play well together. I'd also clean them both with a solvent and say a water-based material. That gets rid of both of them and helps to ensure that the paint or the coating you're gonna be applying goes on a whole lot easier. A lot of paint guys use glass cleaner of some sort on their paint prep. Don't be afraid to use quite a bit either. Like if this stuff's running off, it may even help to run that contaminants out of those joints. Dang. Also, don't be afraid to use a lot of towels, because if the towel's dirty, all you're really doing is just moving all that junk around. If the rag is clean, usually the surface is clean. What's that? Ah. You definitely ain't throwing that in the trash. We don't leave that in the car. Sitting here looking at all this green paint, I kind of feel guilty covering it up. That is a lie, 100%. Yeah. That's what you're looking for. No dirt, contaminants on top of your rag. Our solution to that ugly dash is this cover lay piece that we got from Rock Auto. What's great about these is they make a dramatic improvement without a whole lot of effort. This is a hard plastic cover that simply lays right over top of your original component. They make these in several different colors, and we chose black, but we're still gonna dye this thing because we want the sheens to match. Now to install this, it comes with some silicone glue. You just put around all the perimeters and the openings, and then you lay it into place. Now I want to do a test run of this one on there because I want to make sure that existing green dash is all covered up. So we may have to paint around some of the edges. That's why I went ahead and prepped those earlier. Fits pretty nice, but it does leave a couple of edges here that you can see that are still green. So we'll have to paint all the way around there. So that's what we're gonna do. We'll take this out, do some masking, and do some painting. Whenever you cut this, you don't want to apply a lot of pressure because you don't want to mar the aluminum or scar it really. All you're trying to do is just cut through the tape. But just like with any other painting process, you're really not trying to cover everything in one coat. Put a few light coats on there. Usually turns out way better. Well, I wound up changing my mind a bit, guys. I went ahead and sprayed this thing, but I went and sprayed it flat black instead of gloss black. I decided that the top surface needed to be a little bit different. I'm gonna put this over here, apply my glue, and then we can stick it. Now with the amount of money and labor that we put forth on this thing, man, we have definitely got a great return on our investment. Using these books to do this install isn't mandatory, but I put a few of these on these big body Chevys. And it sure does help to make everything kind of lay out nice and even. Hey guys, well we're continuing on old Fat Stack working on the upholstery work, and I'm actually referring to the carpet. We've showed you guys several times how to tailor fit one of these carpet kits. With our 69 Charger that we built, we had to get a bit creative and call in a hired gun. After making a few templates, we transferred those to some flat stock carpet, cut those out, a little bit of sewing. Next thing you know, we have a showpiece. The end product looked custom and clean. We're gonna be reusing some of those techniques inside of this car and a few more. Now, if you remember back, We wound up installing a 6-speed into old Fat Stack, and it requires some transmission tunnel modifications. With our floor being so close to stock, we believe that one of these stock factory replacement carpet kits will do us just fine. Now with them, you do have options and they have their benefits. With working or ordering carpet, you'll hear a term like mass backing, and what that refers to is this dark gray material on the back side of the carpet. It works really well to reduce temperature and vibrations inside of the car. However, if you're trying to do something custom like we are, it's a bit more complicated to work with. What we're going to be using is the basic stuff. It doesn't have any kind of backing on here, which will allow us to conform it to our application. Now you'll hear terms like stretching, and when you're working with house carpet, you're just meaning to stretch it as tight from one end to the other. And with ours, we're going to stretch it kind of around that big tunnel in there. When installing carpet, I like to look for what I refer to as corners, and that would be like the corner of the floorboard or the toe board, something like that. That is your location point. When you put the carpet in right in top of there, that tells you that the rest of it should kind of follow as it lays on. Know this thing has that whitish backing on it. We're gonna have to cut the section out right through here so that it'll lay down and it'll expose that backing. Now, whenever you go to cut this stuff, you can use a knife or a nice pair of scissors. I actually prefer the scissors. While you're trimming here, make sure you're only cutting through this part, not the carpet itself. Now we're cutting this out as one big piece. That way you can come back and re-add it later instead of just tearing it out in chunks. I would say this is similar to shearing a sheep, but I have no idea what it's like to shear a sheep. Now let's put this thing back in there, see what we got. Well, it's laying in pretty good. Now we got our hole cut for it so everything could fall into place, but what we did notice is it's a little bit higher here like we were anticipating, but in all reality, we could live with this. We're running a bench seat and all of that would be under it. But what we can't live with is this big old protruding section up here. What happened is since this is higher, it kind of tilted this down and it all bunched up. We're gonna take a heat gun, basically melt the backing on there and then lay it back into place and then squish it down. That'll tighten up all this weave and flatten that thing out. Right now we're heating a broad area of this thing, so keep your heat gun moving around on you. Now, this thing can literally melt the holes in that carpet. You can usually tell when it's starting to get right because one, it gets kind of shiny, and two, it gets a whole lot more limber. I just realized something right before I was about to screw up. I need to get some gloves on. Made that mistake once before. Now with my protective gloves on, we'll get it done. Now, it's not all gonna be fixed all at once. It's gonna take a few times to get all that dialed in. What you're doing, you're holding it in place while it's kind of squished up, and as it cools off, it'll hold itself there. And we'll repeat this process probably 5-6 times to get it exactly where we want it. Well, that's way better than it was. Now, if you wanted to continue these little odd bumps here and there, well, you can use this same process. If you're wanting to stretch it to conform kind of around something, exactly the same. Well, I promise you guys, we're gonna be out terrorizing the neighborhood and Fat Stack before you even know it. We keep checking things off the list. You know, the steering column's in it. Gotta have a way to turn the wheel. The dash, it looks a whole lot better. And the carpet is well on its way.
And for us, this is one of our favorite parts of the build, when that finish line's in sight and you can finally see that all your hard work's starting to pay off. And you know what? All we like's finishing up, as Tommy likes to say.
With that, you know, getting some help would be kind of nice. Where you been?
Man, if I told you, there'd be an APB out on my name. Grab that side. You want to go in first or me?
Old Fat Stack is kind of an odd car. And with that said, it being a 71 Caprice, it has a 1 year only half-make grille in it. Now this large egg crate style is actually a pretty sought after piece. Now if you were looking for one of these that was a NOS part, well, you're kind of SOL. To find a good used one, well, that's just as difficult to find as well. Now looking at this one, it's in nice shape. There's no cracks, there's no breaks, not even any nicks in it. However, it does have some corrosion and what I'd like to call some organic material on the surface. Now what we're planning to do with this one is a little bit unorthodox, but we hope that it works. With a delicate component like this, you know, it's 50 plus years old, you gotta take some extra precautions to make sure that you don't tear it up. Now, some might think that you could just grab some steel wool and some polish and just have your way with it. Problem with that is you may do more damage than good. What we're going to be using to brighten up our grill is some corrosion and rust removing solution. Now there's several of these out on the market and a lot of them do a very similar thing. You basically put it in the solution and it dissolves all that crustiness. Now with our old Roadrunner project, we used it on some heater controls. It saved a lot of work, and when we were all said and done, it did make a dramatic difference. Now you're probably thinking with this big old grill that we're gonna need a big old jug of it, like 55 gallons worth, but that's not the case. I'm gonna use a trash bag, a vacuum, and this stuff, and a simple zip tie, and I think we're gonna need a far less amount. Now the trash bag that we're using is one of those heavy mill ones. You know, they're a bit more puncture resistant. And if you're working with a grill or something that's got a pokey surface on it, then you want to pay attention to that. I'm just trying to finagle this thing in here. Oh yeah. Now we're just gonna dump our solution in here. We're gonna use all of it. Now I'm just gonna tie up a trash bag like you would after the Thanksgiving dinner. I'm not choking this thing up all nice and tight. The vacuum's gonna do all that. But I have left a little hole in here, and that's where I'm gonna put the end of the vacuum on here and see if I can collapse this bag. To make sure that that solution is touching the surface, I'm gonna slide it to one side, let it sit for a little while, and then come back, rotate it back over here. Well, we let this thing set overnight, and now all we have to do is cut off our zip tie and see what it looks like once we pull it out of the bag. I bet it's gonna look a lot better once it comes out of there. We're also gonna take it out there and kind of give it a quick bath, see exactly what we've got. And, oh yeah, it's already shiny. Gotta be a little careful. I don't wanna break it. I'm teasing you, I got it turned around backwards so you can't see it. This is the greatest water sprayer outer there ever was. And suck at being a fireman. This is one of those kind of jobs you get to ponder life. It's so tedious. You focus on just what you're cleaning, it drive you nuts. Not too shabby, except for my water sprayer.
Well, after a couple hours of labor, old Tommy has certainly breathed new life back into our old grill. And it looks really nice. And only 9 screws later, and old Fat Stack's gonna have her smile back. One thing I like on these old Caprices is this little emblem up front. You know, if you see that in your rearview mirror, guy behind you means business. This is almost a torque sequence, almost like on an intake. You gotta get all your holes lined up first, start in the center and work your way out. Because if you crank down on these too much, too fast, you can actually start to spread the grill in a sense, and it'll bind up and actually crack as you're tightening it down. So gotta be really careful, especially at this point in a restoration. I think old Tommy would be mighty sore at me if I broke his fancy new grill that he just spent hours and hours cleaning up. So fresh and so clean. And Tommy and I have a lot of hours into the paint and body work on this thing, so before I get this front bumper on, go ahead and mask all this paint off, just to be safe. Now, since the front bumper probably weighs close to 100 pounds, I brought in a hired gun, Mr. Peyton, who's gonna help me with the install. I'll give you the heavy end.
Oh, thanks.
Still good?
Yep.
The good news is this is not awkward or heavy at all, right?
It can come my way a little bit. How about your side? All right, well, I got mine.
Man, if I did 30 of these a day, I might be as fast as those guys on the assembly line. Whew. Well, we're continuing to chip away at the block on our 71 Caprice Fat Stack project. Before we get the rear bumper on, the fuel tank has to go in. Now, the last time you guys saw this thing, it wasn't in the greatest shape. Tommy had to do some full-on open heart surgery so he could pull out the old cinder and make room where we could install the new Phytech setup. After some precise cutting, welding, and a few shots of liquid refreshment, the Caprice's not so great gas tank changed from a pumpkin into a carriage that can supply the fuel needed to the heart of this big green fire-breathing dragon. But it wasn't quite ready for the glass slipper. So we sent it over to the guys at Blast from the Past, and they sandblasted it and powder coated it in this really cool kind of flat silver color. Another thing we did is we went ahead and installed a new factory style sending unit. Even though it's not going to be the main source of our fuel supply, we just needed it for the fuel gauge indicator. Now for our fuel supply for that 840 horsepower Supercharged LS, it's actually going to be our Phytech intake universal pump. And one thing about doing a fuel injection system is we always recommend that you use these AN style fittings. And there's a reason for that. You've got a lot of pressure going through these fuel lines, and it could be in there from 50 to 60 PSI easily. So if you use an old style rubber hose and clamp style for your fuel lines, what could happen is all that pressure could literally blow the lines off of whatever you're using, and that causes a fire hazard. And I don't want that for any of you guys at home any more than you do. Let's get this thing in here. Ideally, this is a two-man job, but if you got a transmission jack like this at home, or even if you're doing it on the floor with a floor jack, it makes things a little bit easier. Kind of awkward and heavy. Luckily, there's no fuel in this thing, though. One time, I had this old S10 ZR2 pickup, and I had to swap the fuel pump on it. I did it in my driveway, and I didn't think ahead. I was a young kid, probably 22, 23. I still had about 3/4 of a tank in there. That was fun. Not my smartest moment, but still got the fuel pump swapped. So my lesson for you at home, if you're gonna do this in your own garage, drain the fuel tank. Perfect. This may be one of the few times that I'm actually looking forward to having gas. Well, we got our fuel tank installed, and now it's time to check off another milestone on our 71 Caprice fat stack project by installing the rear bumper. That's another straightforward process, very similar to the front, only a little bit lighter. How's she look?
Like a new back bumper.
You know, could almost use that thing to shave. I wouldn't recommend it though. You know, guys, we have many different viewers across the entire automotive spectrum. And some of you have been wrenching on cars for decades, while others, well, you may just be getting started. And no matter your level of experience, sometimes it's good to just get back to basics. And in my personal opinion, one of the most important aspects of any build will be dictating the stance on your project. Take old Fat Stack, for example. It's a low, mean, green street machine that's slightly squatted in the rear to give it that perception that it's launching even when it's sitting still. Your tire and wheel size will heavily dictate which direction you want to go. I've got a set of Continental Extreme Contact Sport tires on the table to kind of help guide you through the thought process so that you know you're making the right decision. Most tire manufacturers have a series of letters and numbers stamped on the sidewall. The letters are usually going to dictate a tread style, submodel, or even a speed rating, while the numbers, well, those are going to dictate your size. Now let's take a look at a side-by-side comparison. Now these two tires are pretty much the same, except for one is a 245 and the other is a 275. See that difference? Now the next number is going to be your side tire profile, meaning the real estate going these two directions. So when it comes to stance, this is actually the easiest way to do it. If you raise that number on your rear tires, it will give you more of that hot rod rate, just like road burner. If you decrease that number, the profile becomes smaller, giving your wheel and tire combo that rubber band look. And then finally, your last number is going to be your wheel size. On this one it says 20, meaning only a 20-inch rim can fit inside this tire. And this is one of the most common mistakes people make when they're ordering tires online or buying from a private seller. So make sure you got the right wheel size before you order your set. Hopefully all this information helps you find the ideal stance for your ride.
But we got Fat Stack on the lift to take care of a final detail. Now, from the beginning, we wanted this car to make a powerful and loud statement. And I guess you can say that we have definitely accomplished that.
That's right, we've taken Fat Stack from tired grocery getter to bitchin' big body, and making that over 800 horsepower backed by a 6-speed manual, we really want to give her her own voice. You guessed it, it's exhaust time, and there's several common materials to choose from, mild steel being the most budget friendly. Mild steel is made from a low carbon steel that handles high temperatures well. Fat Stack would have come factory with a mild steel exhaust. The downsides to mild steel, it tends to rust and it doesn't look great. Aluminized steel is a mild steel with an aluminum coating to protect against the elements. It's better than naked mild steel, but the welded seams are likely to rust because the aluminum coating burns off during welding. Stainless steel is corrosion resistant and more appealing to the eye. Stainless is what we're going to go with on Fat Stack. It's going to stand the test of time on a timeless vehicle.
Some like it loud, some like it not so much. Me, myself, I'm kind of one of those people that likes it kind of in the middle. I do enjoy some rumble coming out the tailpipe, but I don't like it so loud that it makes it miserable sitting in or driving the car. However, I am a big fan of open headers. You guys want to hear this thing? Well, we was able to go ahead and get the passenger side exhaust ran, and we're about 95% complete. Doing it this way, it allowed us to go ahead and figure out where we were going to put our hangers and also identify any of the complicated spots. It wasn't too bad, but now we got to get the driver's side done. Oftentimes in the manufacturing process, When they cut this piece of pipe, it leaves a little burr right around the lip of it. Just using a flat file, knocking it down. Now, exhaust installation is not an exact science. It's larger than the other side. It requires all your senses, I think I'm right, and an ability to roll with the punches. The offset of that cross member is different. See what I mean? That one's off by like another inch. Well, if we cut it off, we can put it in place and then see. To make this simple cut, all I'm going to use is our cold saw. It could be done with a chop saw if you've got one, whatever you have. If in doubt, leave a little extra. We could go a little shorter, but not much. And always have a marker in arm's reach. About right here. You nervous?
Well, it's just a lot.
Or, ideally, an extra set of arms. I'm gonna add a little more, just for giggles. Definitely bring a sense of humor and a whole lot of patience. You're gonna need it.
Yeah, maybe about a half long.
Let me wiggle this around to help make it match.
That's about perfect right there.
Okay, your end has to go up.
Up.
Yeah, with any luck, you'll be in the ballpark. We can tack these two together and see how off we are. Well, we're finally ready to install our exhaust tips. Now, we left these things a little bit loose so that we could get it down on the ground to dial them into perfection. Need to put this one in place. We'll be ready to get it where it needs to be.
Well, Tommy, you ready to fire this old girl up?
I'm gonna let you do the honors if you think you can fit.
Well, now you're speaking my language.
You think it's gonna sound aggressive?
Oh, I think it's gonna sound really aggressive.
Well, don't be afraid of it.
It's hard to tame 840 horsepower.
Got a good rumble to it. Woo! I think that's what they call crisp.
It definitely has a good snap to it.
This is where I tell him this is the closest he's gonna get to driving it. What do you think?
I think I'm ready to take it for a ride.
Some might ask, why in the world would you build a 71 Caprice? I knew it had something in it. You may not be into big body cars, but that car has everything that everybody wants in every other car. Now, to hold all that power, we had to put a pretty hefty rear axle under it. And some people have also gave us a little hate mail talking about, man, you're gonna twist that car up, you're gonna do this, you're gonna bend it. It's got enough tire under it to let out plenty of the amount of smoke that we're planning to do that may or may not be seen on camera. It makes plenty of power, it's got the fun stick in it, and yes, we're gonna ring it out. Art can come in different forms. It's fascinating how one's creation can grab your attention and cause your mind to take a stroll down memory lane. You may wonder, is this real? Your eye is saying yes, while your conscience tells you the opposite. Many artists are hopeful to transport you to a different place. It's up to you to determine if your journey is coming to an end or just beginning. So what do you think about this stuff, Peyton?
Well, it's definitely more than just paint on concrete.
I really dig this kind of stuff. Gotta get your thought processes kind of maximized.
Yeah, it's definitely some impressive art.
You know, looking at this thing, it reminds me of what's going on today. We don't really have a destination, but we're headed somewhere.
Oh yeah.
So you feeling something for food, right?
Oh, definitely. Big cheeseburgers and fries.
You know, minute on the lips, days on the hips.
Hey, I'm a growing boy.
I'm not judging you.
Always want a bad boy, they make me feel good.
Months and months of sweat and grit. Sleek and profound? Well, that's an understatement. Our playground is the pavement, and it's time to roll. Well, Peyton, today's the day.
All of our hard work has paid off.
What are you doing?
Danger is my middle name.
That ain't the word I would say.
car rides pretty good. Seat's pretty comfy.
It's definitely like having a lazy boy in here.
Probably kind of wet on your side. Truly puts a smile on my face with all the grins and points and thumbs up we've got today.
You know, we're the only ones that have seen it for the past however many months.
Yeah.
Now we're getting to share it.
You digging the sound of this big body yet? You will.
You get the snap, crackle, and pop.
Yeah. You just gave me a flashback of Ricky Bobby's wife. Woo! I swear Ricky Bobby's wife is in this car somewhere. Ow!
22.2 million dollars.
So what makes Fat Stack so great? A lot.
I mean, the big wheels, the big motor, loud paint job, loud exhaust, spacious trunk. Speaking of which, I think I need to haul some garbage off later. Yard clippings? That's pretty good on the old fuel mileage, as long as you keep your foot out of it.
Well, that means
it does pretty bad on fuel.
yeah. I mean, you know, good thing about it though is the fuel for it's relatively cheap and the tank is huge. Another reason why we called it Fat Stacks. You need that just to ride around a lot.
Nice ride. Yeah, that's super nice here. Wow.
No matter where we went, Fat Stack grabbed attention. Numerous street lights, thumbs up from cars on the road, heck, even pumping gas. Feels good showing off all the long hours spent at the shop. And her drawing a crowd confirms we did good.
What kind of goodies you get us?
I replaced your peanut M&Ms I ate the other day.
Today is a great day for a car ride, bro.
Car building is similar to creating art. You start with a canvas and a vision. With a steady hand, a splash of some color, and a watchful eye paying attention to detail, the next thing you know, you have yourself a masterpiece. All created from what once was nothing. So, would you call this a success? I'd say absolutely.
I'm ready for some fine eating.
After me.